Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're heading back, way back to the blistering heart of ancient Egypt, where you're going to help build the Great Pyramid. Or try, anyway. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Between the sun, the logistics, and the sheer number of things that can go catastrophically wrong when you try to stack 6 million tons of rock into a perfect triangle, this is not a place for the weak. Still, there's something in you that wants to know how this was really done. Not just the textbook answer, not the aliens, not the copper chisel story your 6th grade teacher half believed. Something deeper, maybe even weirder. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and time in the comments too. I want to see who else is up late chasing ancient mysteries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of wind scraping across sandstone and a sky that's too blue to be real. Around you, the world smells like sweat, limestone dust and dry river mud. The air hums with the low grunt of work animals and the endless shouts of labourers moving in practiced chaos. You're barefoot, dressed in a rough linen kilt, and someone has just shoved a chisel into your hand. Welcome to Giza. It's the 4th dynasty. The Great Pyramid is maybe 20% finished, and already it's the biggest thing anyone has ever tried to build. Before you can even start asking questions like, where's the bathroom, or how did I get here? You're marched over to a group of workers who are shaping massive limestone blocks. Each one is about the size of a smart car and 10 times as heavy. The man in charge has a sun-scorched face and a tone that suggests you'd better keep up if you like having fingers. You're here now, and this, apparently, is your job. You spend your first hour learning how to not chip limestone incorrectly. It turns out that even though the pyramid blocks look rough from the outside, the cutting process is delicate. Workers use dolerite pounding stones, basically round boulders tougher than the limestone itself, to bash away at the quarry walls until blocks split off. You try it. It's awful. It's hot. Your arms hurt after 3 minutes, but this is how it's done, at least for the base layers, where the stones are the biggest. Nearby, there's a group doing something a little more advanced. They're fine-shaping casing stones out of whiter, smoother limestone from Tura, brought across the river. You notice they're using copper chisels, but they have to stop every few minutes to reharden them in little charcoal forges. You ask someone why they don't just use iron. He squints at you like you've spoken Martian and mutters, "What's iron?" That's your first real historical moment. They didn't have iron yet. We're talking roughly 2580 BCE. Copper was high-tech, and even that wore down fast. So shaping thousands of perfect blocks took not only manpower, but constant tool maintenance and skill. The more you look around, the more this starts to feel less like slave labour and more like a giant gritty orchestra. And surprise, most of the workers aren't slaves, not in the way you imagined. They're labourers, yes, but also specialists, masons, engineers, boatmen, cooks, architects, scribes. Some of them work in shifts, living in a nearby village that smells suspiciously like onions and beer. You hear laughter, songs, even some occasional gambling when the foremen aren't looking. This is not some endless torture line. It's more like a national project, and they're proud of it. But here's the twist. No one around you actually knows why they're building the pyramid. Sure, they say it's for Khufu, the king, the god on earth. But no one's seen him. The worksite is run by overseers, architects and priests who shuffle plans around like they're guarding nuclear codes. The average worker doesn't question it. You're just here to break rock, haul it, stack it, and repeat. The sense of mystery is everywhere. Then something odd happens. During a break, you sit beside a young scribe who offers you a half-burnt flatbread and starts sketching in the dirt. He draws a triangle, then he draws a second one, identical, but inverted underneath it. A diamond shape. As above, so below, he murmurs, not even looking at you. He wants to live forever, in the stars. And then he just shrugs and walks off. So yeah, already, you're sensing that there's a lot more going on here than burial architecture. That night, as you lie half asleep in the workers' camp, listening to distant drums and the crackle of fire, a debate breaks out between 2 older men. One argues that the pyramid is just a tomb, simple as that. The other insists it's a machine. Not a tomb, a transmitter, he says in hushed tones. It vibrates with the earth. Can't you feel it? He looks straight at you when he says it, and for a second you kind of do feel something. A subtle hum in the ground. Or maybe it's just exhaustion. Here's your fringe fact for tonight. There are pyramid-shaped energy devices being sold online right now. People claim they preserve fruit, sharpen razors, and focus thought. Total junk science. Probably. But the idea that pyramid geometry does something to energy isn't new. The earliest version of this thinking might be sitting right next to you at this campfire, holding a goat leg and gesturing at the stars. You finally fall asleep, brain buzzing, eyes itchy from limestone dust, wondering how this is all supposed to come together, and whether you'll ever get to see it finished. The scholarly debate you're sitting in the middle of, without even knowing it, is one of the longest running in archaeology. Were the pyramids purely tombs, or did they serve other unknown functions? Mainstream Egyptology says yes, they were tombs, despite no actual mummy ever being found inside the Great Pyramid. Fringe theorists and alt history fans argue otherwise, claiming anything from energy generation to stellar communication. The truth? You're probably going to have to see it for yourself. Tomorrow you're moving stone. Whether that's by boat, by ramp, or by some method no one today agrees on, we're about to find out. Morning hits hard. The kind of hard where your bones feel like they've already worked a full shift before you even sit up. The camp is buzzing. Again. Always buzzing. Men boil barley porridge over smoky fires, someone's already shouting about the lack of donkeys, and you're handed a skin of water that smells faintly like leather and a hint of goat. A foreman stomps by, yelling your name, or what he's decided to call you, and points toward the quarry. Today you're not shaping blocks, you're moving them, and that's when you realise the actual nightmare of this job. It's not about carving the stones, it's about getting them where they need to go. Here's your historical reality check. The Great Pyramid consists of about 2.3 million blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons. Some hit 15. Even with thousands of workers, and even if you're doing this for decades, the numbers are jaw-dropping. We're talking a stone laid every couple minutes, constantly, for 20 years. That's like solving the world's most repetitive puzzle, with the world's heaviest pieces, and doing it in 100+ degree heat with no shoes and no sympathy. And here's where it gets weird. You and your team are trying to drag a large limestone block across the sand on a wooden sled. It's going poorly, the sled keeps sinking, the ropes dig into your palms, your back feels like it might just file for divorce. Then one of the overseers casually walks over with a clay jar and pours water, just a splash, on the sand ahead of the sled's path. Like magic, the sled glides forward. Someone laughs and calls it desert sorcery, but a carpenter nearby grins and says, "Less friction. Damp sand is stiffer. It holds the sled better." You pause. Because that's actually clever. This isn't some fluke either. There's evidence, actual wall paintings from the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, showing water being poured in front of sleds transporting massive statues. People knew how to hack the desert. Still, this solves part of the problem. How to move a block horizontally. But what about vertically? That's when your foreman points up. You look at the pyramid. It looms like a mirage made solid, with already dozens of layers of stone stacked into that perfect angled shape. You suddenly feel very, very small. How do you move 2-ton blocks up that high, without cranes, pulleys or forklifts, you ask? No one answers, but you hear the word ramps murmured half-heartedly. So you go looking. You find 3 ramps, well, 3 ideas of ramps. One is a straight ramp up one face of the pyramid, long enough to maintain a gentle slope. But then you realise that would have to be over a mile long to get to the top, made from more material than the pyramid itself. Where's that ramp now? It's not like it just vanished. The second theory is a spiral ramp, wrapping around the outside as the pyramid rose. Okay, clever. But wouldn't that block the view of the corners? You'd need to see the corners to keep the shape symmetrical, which is kind of the whole point. And again, there's zero physical trace of such a ramp. The third, internal spiral ramp. You hear it whispered by one of the scribes. Too modern an idea for them to be discussing, right? But the idea is simple. The ramp isn't outside. It's inside the pyramid, a narrow spiral passageway hidden beneath the surface, wrapping its way upward like a stone corkscrew. No one's found it, not definitively, but even in your time, modern scanners have picked up strange voids and densities along those exact patterns. It's enough to make you stare at the pyramid like it's taunting you. As your team gets assigned to move blocks toward what looks like a steep incline at the pyramid's base, you realise something. The ramp may not be some giant engineering structure at all. It may just be earth. Packed sand and rock, built up layer by layer alongside the pyramid, then torn down after each stage is complete. A disposable ramp. Build it. Use it. Erase it. Genius, really. Here's a quirky fringe fact while you catch your breath. Some people believe the pyramid was never built in the traditional sense at all. That it was grown or softened into place using lost chemical techniques. Kind of like 4,500-year-old 3D printing with rock. More on that later. For now, you just have to move this block 20 more meters uphill without losing your will to live. The sun creeps up as you haul and slide, and you begin to understand what ancient stamina really meant. These workers, your co-workers, aren't just grunting drones. They use slick tricks, pouring water, timing their pulls with chance, carving slight grooves into the sled runners, even rubbing the wood with animal fat when they're desperate. You can't help but admire them. These are not helpless slaves. These are engineers in loincloths, and while your muscles scream, your mind starts to drift. What if this is less about strength and more about sequencing? It's not just hauling rocks. It's placing them in exact locations with uncanny precision. You look around at the tools, plumb bobs, copper measuring rods, chalk, strings, and all that without modern math, or lasers. Yet some of the joints between stones are tighter than a piece of paper can fit through. That's when it hits you. These people are doing this with intention, not guesswork. So, here's your scholarly debate of the night. Was the Great Pyramid engineered from a master architectural plan, or did its construction evolve and change with trial and error? Some researchers argue that precision this extreme requires a preconceived, mathematically perfect blueprint. Others say it was built in phases, with design improvisation as challenges arose. The base, for instance, is nearly perfectly square, off by just a few centimetres over hundreds of metres. But some interior structures seem oddly positioned, as if the plans changed mid-build, like a software update halfway through construction, only with rocks. You collapse at the end of your shift, legs like jelly, your entire being coated in limestone dust. Someone hands you a dried fig. You don't even ask where it came from, you just eat it. That night, staring at the stars above Giza, you start seeing triangles everywhere. The Milky Way arcs like a spiral ramp. Orion rises over the eastern horizon. You wonder what it would take to stack 2 million stones so they line up with the cosmos. And you wonder what kind of mind even thought that was worth doing. You wake up sore in places you didn't know could be sore. Like the muscles between your fingers, the ones no modern gym has ever bothered to name. Your entire body feels like it's been chewed up by a camel and spit back out. Still, when the morning sun creeps over the dunes and the air smells faintly of crushed stone and wood smoke, you rise with everyone else. There's no sleeping in at the base of a world wonder. Today you're reassigned to a different part of the site, one that's more protected from the sun and bustling with activity. You've been drafted into the cutting crew, those lucky few who get to transform quarried stone into the blocks that make up the pyramid's smooth surfaces. You're handed a copper chisel, a wooden mallet, and a piece of instruction that boils down to don't mess it up. This is where the real finesse comes in. Out in the open, some labourers are still pounding away with dolerite stones, brute force splitting massive chunks off the bedrock. But here in the shaping zone it's quieter, focused. You watch an older worker score a long line across the limestone with his chisel, tapping with the precision of a surgeon. Then, with one sudden whack, the stone cleaves cleanly along the seam. Everyone around nods approvingly, like it's a magic trick they've seen 1,000 times. You try the same motion, and immediately botch it. Your line wobbles, your hammer glance bounces off the chisel, and you get a sympathetic pat on the back and a half smirk that says rookie. Still, you keep trying. After a while it becomes meditative. Hammer, chip, measure, smooth. Now here's the thing they didn't tell you in school. These people weren't hacking away randomly with soft metal. They had techniques. Copper chisels were short-lived, yes, but effective when used with patience. You even see guys reheating their tools at little fires, hammering them flat again on stone anvils, dunking them in water to harden the edge. It's like an ancient version of a tool sharpening service, except run by sweaty guys with amazing calluses. But what really gets your attention is the measuring. These workers aren't just eyeballing things, they're using tools, string lines coated with pigment to snap perfect lines, plumb bobs to check verticals, and measuring rods marked in ancient cubits. It's all incredibly analog but shockingly accurate. You realise quickly that you're watching an entire construction culture that's far from primitive. This is craftsmanship layered with math, even if no one around here is calling it geometry. At lunch, you sit beside a man named Kiba. He's missing 2 teeth and speaks with a slow, desert-warmed drawl. He explains that some of the top cutters are actually trained scribes, guys who can read and write, and who design the angles for the casings and corners. He tells you about the golden triangle, about sacred ratios, and how the pyramid's angle, about 51.5 degrees, is more than just structural. It's symbolic. When you raise an eyebrow, he leans in and mutters, "The pyramid is not just a building. It's a number you can walk inside." Then he laughs and rips off a piece of barley cake with his teeth. You're beginning to see that this isn't just a construction site. It's a monastery of measurement, and every rock placed is a ritual. Quirky fact break. At one point in your day, a guy walks by with what looks like a wooden T-square with feathers tied to it. You later learn it's part of a levelling tool. Yes, feathers. They act like primitive spirit levels when attached to a suspended plumb bob. And somehow, it works. Egyptians didn't have lasers, but they had gravity, and they knew how to make it work for them. In the evening, you find yourself watching the sunset from a pile of rubble with a few others. They're talking about the strange blocks, ones with odd angles or non-standard cuts that get rejected or sent to lower courses where they won't show. One man, eyes full of beer and mystery, insists he saw a stone the day before that looked melted, like someone had poured it, not carved it. The others laugh. He just shrugs. "You'll see," he says, "some blocks. They're not what they seem." You file that away, because part of your brain agrees. Something here doesn't quite add up. There's a scholarly debate swirling right under your dusty feet. How exactly did ancient Egyptians shape and fit the blocks with such precision, especially the inner granite structures? Some argue for slow, methodical grinding with sand as an abrasive. Others suggest unknown methods, perhaps even lost materials or tools harder than copper. There's no consensus. What you do know is that, with the tools you've been given, perfection feels impossible, and yet it's everywhere around you. Later that night, someone slips you into the side of a newly added chamber. The interior casing stones are smooth as glass, their joints so tight you can't fit a fingernail between them. You run your hand along the edge, and it's cold, clean, too perfect. Someone once described the pyramid stonework as machine-made. You get it now. Standing here, flashlight or not, you feel like you've stepped into the blueprint of a machine built to last forever. As you step outside into the cool night air, you see the stars again. And there's something about the symmetry of the pyramid rising into that sky that doesn't feel accidental. It feels intentional, sacred maybe, or scientific in a way modern science hasn't caught up to yet. You return to your tent exhausted but awake in your head. The idea that people did this, with hand tools and willpower, feels both inspiring and completely insane. You lie down in the dark and the rock dust in your lungs makes your breath feel heavier, but you can't stop thinking about the block that looked melted, or the man who said it was a number you could walk inside. Tomorrow, you hear, you're going to the quarry. Not just any quarry, the royal one, the place where blocks come from across the Nile, where boats float on sand and time. You're starting to realise the question isn't just how they built the pyramid, it's why they cared so much about doing it perfectly. You're up before the sun this time, following a trail of torchlight down toward the riverbank. The air is still but not quiet. The buzz of preparation hums in the distance, and somewhere behind you someone is yelling about missing oars. A man with shoulders like a sculpture throws you a rope and jerks his head toward a long wooden barge docked awkwardly in a small canal off the Nile. It's your ride. And no, this isn't just a field trip, it's quarry day. Today you're going to see where the limestone is born. The journey begins with an eerie calm. The sky shifts from purple to amber, the water below you a mirror of it all. Your barge creaks and groans as men push it along the canal with long poles. Someone in the back is singing, something low and rhythmic, and it carries across the still water like a prayer. There's something comforting about it until your seat shifts under you and you realise there's nothing between you and the Nile but a few planks and some very optimistic ancient carpentry. Eventually the quarry rises into view, bright white cliffs glowing in the early light like bones sticking out of the earth. You don't need to be told this is Tura limestone, the good stuff, smooth, clean, royal. It's the stone that'll eventually coat the outside of the pyramid, gleaming in the sun like a beacon. You feel a small thrill knowing that what gets pulled from here today might end up fitted high on the king's tomb, or whatever it is they're really building. You hop off the boat and your sandals crunch into the crushed remains of thousands of years of quarried stone. The sight is massive. Workers hammer, drag, shout. Some are chipping away at the cliffside, others are manoeuvring sleds loaded with half-shaped blocks. You're handed a mallet and told to start pounding. It's back-breaking. But this time, there's a kind of logic to it. You're shown how to spot the natural lines in the stone, where the rock wants to break. Thin copper saws with wet sand are used to slice the finer casing stones, and you get to try it. It's slow, maddeningly slow. You sweat through your tunic in minutes. But after hours of sawing and hammering, the stone suddenly splits clean down the line. It's satisfying in a way nothing digital ever is. While you work, one of the older cutters tells you a story. He says the stones sometimes decide when to leave the earth, that if you push too hard, they punish you. Split wrong, fall on toes, cause sleds to tip. But if you wait for the right moment, they come willingly. He winks and says, "Same with wives." Then he gets back to cutting like he's done it for 10 lives. That might be your quirky fact of the day. Ancient quarrymen believed stone had spirit. Not metaphorically, literally. Many of them left offerings in small cracks in the walls before a big cut. Fish bones, little amulets, even beer. As if they were negotiating with the earth itself. Science might call it superstition, but given how many fingers are still attached to the guys doing this, you're not judging. By midday, your group has successfully cut several new blocks, and you watch as one is carefully slid onto a sled, tied down and dragged back toward the boat ramp. You ask the foreman how they plan to get a 15-ton rock across the river. He smiles and simply says, "Like we always have." And that's where the Nile becomes part of the story. Turns out the ancient Egyptians didn't need to drag stone across miles of desert. They brought the river to the pyramid. During flood season, a network of canals connected the Nile directly to the construction site. Archaeologists have found remnants of those canals buried beneath modern Giza. The pyramid wasn't just at the edge of the desert, it was a port. So you help load the sled onto a wide wooden barge, basically a floating platform, and hold your breath as it creaks and groans under the weight. The builders use papyrus rope and precise balancing to keep it level. Then, with coordinated pushes and shouts, the barge is nudged away from the dock and begins to drift. It's a surreal sight. A massive stone block floating down the Nile like it's on a Sunday cruise. You ride with it, squinting into the sun. Birds fly overhead. The wind picks up just enough to ripple the water, and for a moment it all feels absurdly modern. Like logistics is the one thing that's never changed. People moving heavy stuff from point A to point B, arguing about balance, and yelling push until someone pulls a muscle. Here's where a historical debate creeps in. How exactly did they move these blocks so efficiently by water? Some historians believe in huge boat convoys ferrying stones from both local and distant quarries. Others argue smaller barges with complex loading ramps and team relays. A few fringe theories suggest ancient locks or even water-lubricated sleds. The hard part, very little of the infrastructure survives. No blueprints, no instruction manuals, just scars in the bedrock and the occasional wall painting hinting at something grander than we can prove. You disembark back at the worksite where the block is dragged off the barge and onto a waiting ramp. It'll be hauled uphill later. Right now the focus is just getting it out of the sun. The labourers move fast. There's a rhythm to it, a flow, like ants working in perfect coordination. You feel lucky to be part of it. By now, the sun is low and the day's colour is starting to drain. Someone brings you a drink that tastes like sour bread and salt. It's beer, they claim, though your stomach suggests otherwise, but it cools you down, and you watch the barge head back upriver for another load. Another stone, another piece of the impossible. As night falls, you sit at the edge of the canal, feet dangling just above the water. Behind you, the pyramid stands like a jagged shadow against the stars, and for the first time, You understand what it means to build something bigger than yourself. Literally, yes, but also spiritually. These people believe they're participating in the eternal. They're not just stacking rocks, they're lifting the soul of the king toward the heavens, or sending a message, or building a machine. Whatever it is, it's working. You wake up sore again, because apparently there's no limit to how many ways the human body can ache after moving rocks the size of compact cars. Today, though, the air feels different. There's a breeze coming from the east, and it smells like river and clay. You're told you're heading to the desert again. Not to the pyramid this time, but to the port. Yes, the desert port. It sounds like a contradiction, until you remember the thing nobody mentions when talking about how the pyramids were built. The Nile wasn't always where it is now, so you walk, passing between flat-roofed worker villages and palm-covered courtyards until the ground hardens into dry clay. Ahead, low mounds rise, barely noticeable, like worn-down dunes. But your guide points and says, "Canal. Old one." You squint and see it, a dry ditch tracing across the desert floor, still curving in places like a fossil of water. Welcome to the ancient logistics hub, the forgotten river highway. You arrive at what remains of a harbour, one that's been buried for millennia but was once alive with sound and chaos. Men shouting, boats creaking, sleds sliding onto docks. Today it's silent, save for the wind and the crunch of your sandals over sand. And then someone shows you the papyri. They're old, brittle, stored in a clay jar and covered in symbols. You can't read them, but a scribe nearby does. His voice rises and falls as he reads aloud, and you hear it in translation. The daily logs of a man named Merer, an overseer of stone transport from Tura to Giza. He records how many men he commanded, how many trips his team made, how the boats moved the white stones to the horizon of Khufu, the pyramid itself. This is the first time you've seen ancient paperwork, real evidence, and it changes everything. Because here's your historical fact of the day. These papyri, discovered near Wadi al-Jarf, are the oldest known written documents on Earth. They're literal receipts for pyramid construction. Not myth, not hearsay, logistics. You hold a copy in your hands, carefully, and realize the pyramid wasn't built in mystery. It was built in spreadsheets. Still, for all the paperwork, no one seems entirely sure how they built the boats big enough to carry those stones. You meet an old carpenter who works with stonecutters to outfit sleds. He tells you that the boats were flat-bottomed, made of cedar from Lebanon, and could be dismantled and reassembled as needed. The joints were locked with ropes that swelled when wet, tightening the hull. Ingenious, but also lost. Because even today, nobody has found one of the actual pyramid barges, just the famous funerary boats buried beside the pyramid, massive, gorgeous, symbolic. But were they symbolic, or were they blueprints? That's your quirky fact for today. The Khufu ship, buried in pieces beside the Great Pyramid, was so carefully disassembled that it took modern archaeologists years to reassemble. Over 200 pieces, no nails, no modern tools. It fit together like a wooden puzzle, flawless in design. Some say it was purely ceremonial, built for the pharaoh's soul to sail the afterlife. Others wonder if it was used, at least once, to transport something precious, or someone. You sit by a half-reconstructed barge replica, its wood still sticky with resin, and watch as a team of modern workers tries to replicate what the ancients did by instinct. It's clumsy. The wood warps, the ropes slip, and you start to think maybe we lost more than we think. Not just knowledge, but memory. That night you sleep near the port. No tent, just the stars above and the faded remains of the canal beside you. In the dark, the desert looks like the sea. Flat, wave-like. You picture boats gliding over what is now solid ground, bearing stone after stone toward a structure that's still growing in the distance. And then you think, if the Nile once reached this far inland, maybe the whole construction process was about timing. Maybe they built when the river was high, the canals open, the stone practically floating to the base of the pyramid. Maybe the desert wasn't a problem. Maybe it was part of the plan. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the pyramid builders alter the landscape to suit their needs, or did they choose the location specifically because of its access to seasonal water routes? Some argue that the ancient engineers built artificial canals redirecting the Nile. Others think they simply took advantage of flood cycles and geography, working like clockmakers with the Earth's rhythms. Either way, what's clear is this. The desert wasn't just endured, It was mastered. You wake in the middle of the night to distant drums. No music, just rhythmic beating. At first you think it's a dream, but then you notice others sitting up too, listening. One man says it's from the stone-laying teams working by moonlight. Another says it's just wind. But the oldest man in your group, a guy whose skin is more scar than flesh, whispers, "That's the sound of the pyramid breathing." And just like that, you're back in the mystery. Because even with all the stone and wood and sweat and now receipts, you still feel it. This wasn't just construction. It was coordination on a cosmic scale. The tools were basic, the terrain was harsh. But somehow, a group of humans, 4,500 years ago, figured out how to move millions of stones, up rivers and across deserts, into alignment with the stars. Not just as an act of devotion, but with calculation, with intent. And tomorrow, you're going to see what happens when those stones start rising, when the ramps begin, when vertical becomes the obsession. Because horizontal, that's just the start. Dawn breaks over Giza with a sky so pink and gold, it looks hand-painted. You're already awake, crouched beside a long, dusty incline running alongside the pyramid's face. It's steep, steeper than you expected, and made of compacted mud brick, stone chips, and a layer of crushed limestone dust. Ropes hang from makeshift pulleys. Teams of workers line the path. Everyone's tense. Today, you're testing the ramp. And not just a ramp, the ramp. The biggest mystery in all this. The ramp that shouldn't exist. Because if the pyramid was built block by block, each one weighing between 2 and 15 tons, then the question has always been, how in the name of Ra did they lift them? It starts simple. You're handed a rope, joined by about 24 other labourers, and positioned behind a sled loaded with a test block, just under 2 tons. Manageable. The foreman waves a stick in the air and you begin pulling. It's fine at first. The sled slides surprisingly smoothly along the ramp, helped by the layer of wet sand strategically spread along the path. The incline is just shallow enough that momentum helps, but then it tilts steeper. You feel it in your thighs, then your shoulders, then your spine. Someone ahead stumbles, the sled lurches, threatening to tip. A foreman shouts something about balance and rhythm, but it's lost under the grunt of 20 men about to pull their collective guts out. Eventually, the sled reaches a platform halfway up the pyramid's face where you stop to rest. You sit back, panting, and glance around. The platform is just wide enough to maneuver the stone before it's placed onto the current course of the pyramid. You realise that even with a ramp, this process is a brutal symphony of timing, muscle, and micro-adjustments. There's no room for error. Misplace a stone by a few inches, and it throws off the entire structure above it. That's when you meet the architects. Not priests, not workers. These are the math guys. One carries a knotted rope with markings on it, the ancient Egyptian version of a calculator. Another checks angles with a wooden triangle and a plumb bob. Their job isn't to lift, but to measure. Constantly. Precisely. A mistake today means disaster tomorrow. One of them shows you how the ramp curves slightly. Not much, but just enough to keep the stones travelling in a spiral around the pyramid. You blink. Wait, spiral? He nods. Too steep to go straight, so we go around. Here's your historical curveball. No one agrees on what kind of ramp was actually used. There are 3 main theories. One is a straight ramp built from the base, extending out hundreds of meters, a monster structure, bigger than the pyramid itself, then completely dismantled afterward. You've seen the desert. There's no trace of such a thing. The second is a zigzag ramp up one face of the pyramid, switching back and forth like a ski trail. That would allow continuous access and better visibility, but the switchbacks would make moving massive stones a logistical nightmare. The third, the one you're on now, a spiral ramp, possibly wrapping around the structure, either externally or internally. Yes, inside the pyramid. And that's where things get fringe. Some researchers today believe the Egyptians built the ramp inside the pyramid structure as they went. A sort of secret tunnel spiral, buried forever beneath layers of stone. In fact, there's evidence from modern scans, infrared imaging, muon tomography, that hints at unusual voids and spaces inside the pyramid's body. Unexplained, undocumented, maybe even forgotten. What if the construction tools are still in there, sealed behind the very walls they helped build? You help position the test block into place on one of the lower levels of the pyramid, and even that takes another full team, multiple pry bars, levers, and a lot of yelling. The block has to slide into a space just wide enough to accommodate it, with barely a millimetre's tolerance. Too far, and it'll crack the next stone. Too short, and it'll leave a gap. You wonder, briefly, if perfection was always the goal, or if they just got better as they went. Some of these lower blocks are huge, uneven, more rugged. But as you look up toward the higher courses still under construction, the stone seems smaller, cleaner, more uniform, like a team of artists refining their craft mid-project, or a blueprint, evolving. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the pyramid builders use a consistent ramp system all the way to the top, or did they switch strategies as elevation increased? Some scholars think the lower levels used external ramps, while the higher courses switched to internal or side ramps due to logistics. Others argue that the spiral ramp theory explains both the lack of surviving ramp evidence and the pyramid's precision, but no one can prove it, because once the ramp is gone, or buried, it's like it never existed. During your break, you find yourself near a smaller stone with strange grooves in it. A mason tells you it's a reused ramp stone, one with notches carved into it to keep the sleds from slipping. They recycle them, he says. Nothing wasted. You ask what happens when they run out of limestone. He shrugs. We always find more. He says it like it's a law of the universe. You help haul one more block before the sun begins to bake the ramp into a dangerous slipway. By mid-afternoon, the day's effort ends. You and the other workers collapse in the shade beneath a temporary awning, sipping warm beer from ceramic jugs and fanning your blistered hands. That night you talk to an architect who insists the pyramid isn't just a structure, it's a process, a machine that reveals itself only through being built. He sketches a spiral on a clay shard, then overlays a triangle. The ramp is the pyramid, he says. Without the movement, the shape has no meaning. And here's your quirky fringe fact. A few fringe theorists believe the entire pyramid was a sort of giant labyrinth. Ramps, corridors, hidden voids, used not just for construction, but as an initiation chamber. A place where the act of building mirrored some spiritual transformation. Sounds wild, until you remember that everything about this build is already wilder than fiction. You lie down that night back in the workers' village, arms buzzing, legs like overcooked reeds, but your mind's wide awake. The ramp was never just a slope. It was a mystery buried in plain sight. Something they built and erased, used, and then swallowed with stone. Tomorrow you're going deeper, inside, toward the pyramid's core. Not as a tourist this time, but as someone trying to find the hidden spiral, and maybe more. You're standing at the base of the pyramid again, staring up at millions of tons of stone stacked into a shape so mathematically crisp it makes your brain ache. The workers are already in motion, shuffling across the scaffolds and ramps like ants in perfect rhythm. But today, you're not following them up. Today, you're going in. The entrance isn't obvious. It's hidden along the north face, just off-centre. A sloping corridor vanishes into the darkness at an angle so steep it feels like a dare. The stone above you groans faintly as if remembering every block it had to support over the last 4,500 years. The air is suddenly cooler, tighter. You duck your head and step into the pyramid's belly. The passage narrows immediately. It smells like rock and thyme. You trail your hand along the walls, limestone smooth in places, crumbling in others. You're walking at a downward angle, feeling the weight of everything above you pressing through the silence. It's not just that you're inside a structure, you're inside a pressure chamber. Millions of tons and not a single support beam in sight. Then the tunnel splits. One path keeps going down, deep into the rock. The other leads upward, towards something much stranger. You take the incline. This is the start of the Grand Gallery, but we'll get there soon. Right now, you're squeezed into what feels like the world's first crawl space, inching through a claustrophobic passage that has no business being this narrow in a building this enormous. A candle flickers ahead, held by a scribe with a thin smile and ink-stained fingers. He's your guide today. He says almost nothing, just motions you forward, deeper into the heart of a mystery. And then you see it. The first faint hint of the internal ramp. It's not a tunnel in the traditional sense, more like a horizontal groove carved into the stone wall beside you, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. But once you do, you can't unsee it. A consistent width, a strange curve, like something spirals up behind the blocks, hidden in the bones of the pyramid. You press your ear to the wall, almost jokingly. Silence. Then, a breeze? A soft, hollow draft that shouldn't be possible this deep inside solid stone. You knock. The sound doesn't echo like it should. There's space behind the wall. Space no one's ever officially mapped. Here's your historical mindbender. In the early 2000s, a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed the internal spiral ramp theory. He believed the pyramid was constructed with a hidden corridor spiraling upward inside, just beneath the outer surface. Modern scanning has shown unusual density variations exactly where that ramp would be. It hasn't been confirmed, but you're standing in what might be the physical proof, a secret staircase frozen in rock. You follow your scribe guide up another incline, and the space opens, just slightly. You're standing in a small chamber used by stone handlers, and the walls here tell a different story. There are strange marks, scuffed corners, deep grooves, and a few very deliberate notches carved into the blockwork. These weren't ceremonial, these were functional, like someone was hauling something heavy around and around inside the pyramid itself. You rest on a block that never made it into final placement. It's slightly off size, maybe a practice piece, maybe a leftover, but the angle is sharp, too sharp for accident. You notice chisel marks forming an arc, consistent with turning a heavy sled around a curve. It's speculative, but you're starting to believe, and then your guide takes you to the niche. It's a shallow recess, half hidden behind a dusty slab near the chamber wall. Someone has tried to cover it with debris, but the gap is there. A hole. Not big enough to crawl into, but just large enough to see beyond. An empty shaft, ascending in a tight spiral. Dust dances in the light. You can't see the top. Void, your guide whispers. Still breathing. That's your quirky fact for today. The pyramid may still have secret chambers. In 2017, researchers used muon tomography, a type of particle scanning, to detect unexplained voids inside the pyramid, including a large one above the Grand Gallery. No one's been inside. No one even agrees what it is. A ramp, a hidden chamber, a structural relic. You may be looking right at it now. As you pull away from the shaft, your guide touches your shoulder and gestures upward. "We go now," he says softly. He leads you into the Grand Gallery, but we're saving that for later. For now, you pause at a landing, panting slightly from the climb. The walls sweat condensation, the stone feels alive, and above you, beyond the ramp, the blocks continue. One after another, precisely placed, like time stacked in stone. Here's the scholarly debate you now feel in your gut. Was the internal ramp real? And is it still inside the pyramid, hidden forever behind unbroken stone? Traditional Egyptologists argue there's no hard evidence, no entry points, no surviving maps, just scans, speculations, and a few strange air currents where there should be none. But others are more confident. The voids match, the math checks out. And if it's real, it means the Great Pyramid was a labyrinth as much as a monument. Its secrets built into the structure, not beneath or behind it. You leave the ramp corridor behind with one final glance. The light from your torch fades down the spiral, caught by dust motes that glitter like stars. For a second, you imagine what it would have felt like centuries ago to drag a granite block through this unseen loop, alone, in the dark, with nothing but silence and breath. You emerge blinking into the afternoon sun, stone dust clinging to your clothes, your mind spinning. They built a pyramid, sure, but maybe they also built a pathway, one that winds upward, hidden forever. Not just to move blocks, but to move you. Tomorrow you're going back in, not through the side, but deeper, into the gallery, into the place where the air shafts begin and geometry turns to mysticism. You're back inside the pyramid, barely 20 steps in, and already it feels like the stone has swallowed you. The air is stale and metallic, like it's been sitting still for centuries, which, honestly, it has. You hold your torch low, casting long shadows that jitter over the rough walls, and your guide says nothing, just gestures you deeper. He's calm. You, not so much. Because today, you're headed into the stranger corners of this place, the parts where explanations fall apart and things get whispered. You've heard the rumours already. Everyone at the worksite has. Not official, of course. No one's writing it down in neat hieroglyphs. But the whispers follow you, about certain priests watching the stars for signs, about rituals held in chambers that aren't on any plan, about the name Sirius being spoken with reverence, fear, or both. This isn't part of your work. You were supposed to be hauling tools today. But then a man with dark eyes and a cobra tattoo on his wrist handed you a linen bundle and simply said, "Come at dusk." So you did. And here you are. You're led into a chamber, small, square, surprisingly clean. There's a stone bench, a sloped ceiling, and a crack in the far wall that doesn't look accidental. It's not a doorway. It's thinner than that, a narrow slit just wide enough to stick a hand through. Your guide steps aside and lets you peer in. You do. It's pitch black. Then something flickers. Not light exactly, more like a shimmer, a glint. You blink and pull back. It's gone. Your guide smiles faintly. You saw? You nod, unsure what you actually saw. Starshaft, he says. You recognize the term. You've heard it whispered among architects and whispered again in the camp over firelight. These aren't air shafts. They don't connect to anything breathable. They're angled precisely, deliberately, to point at stars. And not just any stars. Orion's belt, Sirius, the pole star. Now here's your historical fact. The Great Pyramid contains 4 narrow shafts, 2 from the King's Chamber, 2 from the Queen's. For centuries, no one knew what they were for. They're too small for humans to crawl through, and they don't function as air vents. Then, in the 20th century, people noticed something. The shafts line up with key stars. One of them, from the King's Chamber, points directly at Orion's belt around 2500 BCE. Another at Sirius is not coincidence. It's ancient astronomy carved into limestone. Your guide picks up a small mirror, a polished bronze disc, and uses it to bounce a bit of torchlight into the shaft. For a split second, the beam follows the line perfectly, vanishing into the narrow throat of the pyramid. You imagine the light travelling for meters, kissing a chamber wall no one's seen in millennia. You get goosebumps. Messages, your guide murmurs, from the king or to him. You ask, half joking, if it's meant for aliens. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he unrolls a papyrus scroll. It's covered in diagrams, triangle upon triangle, strange waves, looping symbols that aren't standard hieroglyphs. You ask what language it is. He shrugs. Not mine. Okay, now you're uncomfortable. Here's your fringe fact of the day. There's a group of modern researchers and a few eccentric mystics who believe the Great Pyramid was built not just to house a king, but to communicate. That it acts like an antenna, transmitting energy or information to somewhere, or something, beyond. Some claim it channels Earth's magnetic field. Others insist it's aligned to receive messages from the stars. A few go full ancient astronaut and say the whole thing is a beacon to the gods, or their GPS. You dismiss it. Kind of. But then you remember the shafts, their impossible precision, their refusal to be functional in any ordinary sense. Your guide brings you to a side chamber, darker, warmer. You smell incense, a thick blend of myrrh and something sharper. There's a circle of men seated on the floor, eyes closed, chanting low syllables that don't sound Egyptian. At least not the kind of Egyptian you've heard. The tone hums in your chest. You feel it in your teeth. One of the men opens his eyes and nods at you. No welcome, just recognition. In the centre of their circle is a stone bowl, filled with what looks like water but reflects no light. It just sits there, heavy, thick, like liquid shadow. Your guide motions for you to step closer. You hesitate. You do it anyway. When you look into the bowl, you don't see your reflection. You see stars, moving stars. Orion again, Sirius. Then a third one you don't recognize, burning green. You stumble back. The chanting stops. No one says anything. One of the men sprinkles something into the bowl. The illusion vanishes. Just water now. Or whatever it was before. You leave the chamber with your guide, shaken but silent. As you re-enter the corridor, the pyramid feels even heavier. Not just a monument now, a memory machine. A ritual in stone. Built to last forever, but also, maybe, built to function. As something. For someone. Here's your scholarly debate. Were the shafts intentional star alignments, or are we over-interpreting them? Some Egyptologists argue the connections are clear. The ancient Egyptians obsessed over Orion and Sirius, associating them with Osiris and Isis. Others say Yes, they looked up at the stars, but attributing astronomical precision to narrow limestone holes is a reach. The evidence is partial, the function unproven. But the angles, the math, the dates, they line up too well to ignore. You climb back out of the pyramid just before sunrise. The air outside is sweet, open. You breathe like you've escaped something heavy. You sit alone on a carved block and look to the east. Sirius is just fading, swallowed by dawn. You wonder what messages have already passed through those shafts, and what might still be waiting to be heard. In the distance, the workers begin again, pulling, chiseling, shouting. Life continues, but in your head the chant is still humming. The green star still burns behind your eyelids. Tomorrow, you're going to meet someone who supposedly designed all of this. A man so brilliant, mysterious and mythologized that he may as well have been the architect of reality itself, Imhotep. You wake up confused, convinced the stars are still in your eyes. For a second, you're not. Sure, if you dreamt that strange chamber, the star shafts, the chanting, the dark liquid that wasn't quite water. But the dust in your nostrils and the aching in your knees confirm otherwise. You really were inside the pyramid last night. And today, you're off to meet the man who, if rumours are true, dreamed the whole thing into existence, Imhotep. The name hangs in the air like a whispered password. Everyone knows it, no one says it too loudly. It doesn't appear in the work logs or the papyri, but if you mention it around architects or priests, you get a nod, a knowing look, like you're finally asking the right questions. Your guide this morning is not a labourer, not even a craftsman. He's a temple scholar, cloaked in linen that's way too clean for someone working near a giant dirt triangle. He walks lightly, like he's gliding over the sand. As you follow him towards Saqqara, you begin to realise you're stepping out of Giza's chaos and into something older, more calculated, more holy. The pyramid of Djoser rises ahead of you, jagged and tiered like a stone wedding cake that's been left too long in the sun. It's not as smooth as the Great Pyramid, but it's different. The first, the prototype, this is Imhotep's work, or so they say. You pass through rows of crumbling columns that still somehow stand upright, their fluted edges worn soft by time. The sun cuts between them in stripes. Ahead, an alcove opens into a modest hall where a man waits. Not ancient, not a priest, but an official, sharp-eyed and suspicious. You're told you may ask your questions. Carefully. So you do. Who was Imhotep? The man smiles, tight-lipped, and simply says he was the first one to know. And what he knew apparently was everything. Here's your historical fact. Imhotep was a real person. He lived around 2650 BCE and served as chancellor to Pharaoh Djoser. He was high priest of the sun god Ra, an architect, a physician, a poet, and eventually a god, deified centuries later by Greeks and Romans who saw in him a kind of ancient Da Vinci figure. The man who designed the first step pyramid, the inventor of stone construction, the father of medicine, a polymath so advanced that people stopped believing he was ever human at all. But here's the mystery. His name is not associated with the Great Pyramid, not officially. That credit goes to Hemunu, Khufu's vizier, and yet you hear Imhotep's name whispered constantly around Giza. The theory? He didn't just design the step pyramid, he set the blueprint for all pyramids, passed down through initiates, guarded by architects who followed his sacred proportions. In short, Imhotep was the one who cracked the geometry of immortality, and everyone else just copied him. You're led to a room filled with tools, stone drills, copper chisels, measuring cords. But what catches your eye is a tablet carved with lines and angles, circles and triangles. Nothing decorative, just math, ratios, a notation system not meant to be beautiful but useful. You run your fingers along it and someone behind you says, "His language." You turn. A young scribe has joined you, eyes wide with the kind of devotion usually reserved for gods or pop stars. "He gave us measurement," the scribe says. "Without him, the pyramid is just a hill." You sit with the scribe and he shows you how the sacred triangle works, a 3-4-5 ratio that forms a perfect right angle. It's simple, but powerful. Builders use it every day, in ropes knotted at equal intervals to square foundations with eerie precision. But the scribe goes further. He talks about the golden angle, about harmonic alignments with the stars and a concept called mayat, the balance between chaos and order. To build a pyramid, he says, you need more than tools. You need alignment with the universe. Here's your fringe fact of the day. Some researchers, both fringe and mainstream, argue that the pyramids encode knowledge far beyond their time. Ratios resembling pi, the golden ratio, distances that correlate to the Earth's curvature or to planetary orbits. It's controversial. Some say it's coincidence. Others believe ancient architects like Imhotep had access to advanced knowledge, mathematical, astronomical, even quantum, that's since been lost, or hidden. You leave the chamber with your mind spinning. The idea that one man, 400-600 years ago, might have mapped out a blueprint that still baffles modern engineers, it's not just impressive, it's unsettling. On the way back toward Giza, your guide stops you by a half-buried structure, not a pyramid, a square hole lined with stone, a shaft to somewhere. He says it's part of a complex never finished, a failed experiment, but he speaks of it with reverence. Not all failures are mistakes, he says. Sometimes they're rehearsals. And you wonder, how many pyramids did they try before getting it right? How many buried prototypes lie beneath the sand, unnoticed, forgotten, but still humming with Imhotep's original code? Here's your scholarly debate. Was Imhotep truly the originator of pyramid design, or just the first one to get credit for something older? Some Egyptologists suggest that pyramid building knowledge may have predated him, passed down orally or ritually from even earlier cultures. Others believe he was the breakthrough, someone who formalized and recorded geometry in a way that transformed chaos into permanence. But the records are scarce. The myth has grown large. It's hard to separate the man from the legend. You arrive back at Giza in the late afternoon, and something about the pyramid looks different. Not physically, but symbolically. It no longer feels like a tomb, or even just a structure. It feels like a key, a coded message in stone, written by someone who may have figured out how to measure the earth using only rope and shadow, who may have built for more than kings. You lie in your tent as the wind whistles past. The stars above are crisp again. Orion hangs low. You wonder if Imhotep looked up at the same pattern and saw something we missed. An instruction, a map, or a warning. Tomorrow you're following the stars themselves. Because once you learn the structure was designed with the cosmos in mind, you have to ask, what exactly were they pointing at? And who or what was supposed to notice? The stars don't twinkle in the Egyptian desert. They stab, pinpricks of pure light in an ink-black sky, far brighter than anything you've seen in your modern city life. You lie there outside your tent before dawn, blanket wrapped loosely around your shoulders, watching the constellation Orion climb into the heavens. Again. Because it's always there, every night, like a cosmic supervisor making sure the pyramid project stays on track. Today, you're going to find out why. As the horizon warms, your guide, same scribe from the day before, the one obsessed with angles and triangles, meets you with a collection of tools, a notched stick, a polished bronze disc, and what looks suspiciously like a protractor carved from bone. He doesn't speak at first, just walks toward the rising sun, and begins to measure its angle against a plumb line. You follow him to a raised platform east of the pyramid, a viewing site where surveyors once stood, aligning the entire project, not with other buildings, but with the sky. You already know the pyramid is square. What you probably didn't know, what most people still don't, is that it's almost perfectly aligned to true north. Like absurdly perfect. We're talking a margin of error so small it wouldn't matter even on a modern highway. How they did this without compasses, satellites, or laser levels is the reason you're here today. The scribe explains it in slow phrases, pointing from the stars to the pyramid and back. He shows you how they used two plumb lines, hung vertically, then watch stars pass between them at night, specifically circumpolar stars, the ones that never set. Using this method, they could pinpoint true north with stunning accuracy. It was tedious, required hours of nighttime observation and calculation, but it worked. Here's your historical fact of the day. Researchers now believe the ancient Egyptians may have used a technique called dual star alignment, watching the movement of two stars, possibly Kochab and Mizar, as they rotated around the celestial pole. When one star passed directly above the other, bam, true north, mark the line, lay the base, build your future. But why all this precision? Why bother aligning a giant rock triangle to the stars? Because they weren't just building a tomb, they were building a machine to interface with eternity. The scribe unrolls a cloth map of the sky, embroidered with constellations that look both familiar and alien. You see Orion's belt, 3 stars in a slanted row. Below them, a larger star, Sirius. To the left, the shape we call the Big Dipper, though here it's something different, more symbolic. He points at Orion, then at the 3 pyramids of Giza. You already know what's coming, but he tells you anyway. The pyramids, he says, are stars. The theory you've heard whispered around the camp is suddenly laid bare, simple and bold. The 3 main pyramids at Giza, Khufu, Khafre and Menkaure, are arranged to mimic Orion's belt. Not just vaguely, with uncanny similarity, even accounting for the smaller pyramid's offset placement. The sizes differ, yes, but the alignment, it's deliberate and old. That's your quirky fringe fact, the Orion correlation theory. Popularised in the 1990s, it suggests that the pyramid layout is not just practical or aesthetic, but cosmological. The ancient Egyptians believed Orion was the celestial form of Osiris, god of the dead and rebirth. Aligning the pyramids with Orion wasn't metaphorical. It was ritual architecture, a stellar resurrection map built in stone, pointing the soul of the pharaoh toward the afterlife. You ask your guide how they knew the positions of the stars so precisely. He points to the horizon again. "We watched," he says. You try to argue, but this kind of knowledge takes generations, charts, equations. He interrupts you. Yes, generations. And you realise then, painfully and clearly, that the builders of the pyramids may have been inheriting data from a civilization older than we credit. Oral history, celestial lore. Star maps traced not on paper, but in the architecture itself. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the Egyptians intentionally mirror Orion's belt, or is the resemblance coincidence? Critics argue that with millions of possible shapes and configurations, some are bound to line up accidentally. They say there's no hard evidence in the inscriptions, no text that says, "We copied Orion." But proponents point to the cultural obsession with the stars, the shaft alignments, the burial texts, and the undeniable visual match. The question remains unresolved, but the mystery lingers. As the morning brightens, you and your guide walk the Giza Plateau. He shows you how the pyramid's angles match the angle of the sun on the solstices, how shafts within the pyramid point toward rising stars at key times of the year, how even the mortuary temples align with constellations. This isn't city planning, it's celestial choreography, and it's not just Egypt. Later that evening, another scribe from Nubia joins your fire circle and starts talking about the mirror places. He describes pyramids in Sudan, in Mesoamerica, even far-flung stone hills in China. All similar in shape, some aligned to the stars, some following solar paths. No contact between these cultures, no shared language, just the same idea, echoing across continents. You sit in silence, staring at the fire, wondering, what made all these? People, all across the world, look up, then build down. That night you lie on your back again. Orion is there, sharp and sure. The pyramid beside you looks like it's about to lift off the sand and fly straight into the stars. You can't help but wonder, was that the plan? Tomorrow you're going inside again, into the Queen's chamber. Not the showy one with the grand ceiling, the other one, the one that shouldn't exist and yet might hold the strangest clue of all, and maybe, just maybe, a whisper of someone or something watching from above. You've been in the pyramid more times than you can count now, through its dusty corridors, up narrow ramps, into shafts that shouldn't exist. But today feels different. Today, you're not heading into the grandeur of the King's Chamber or the sprawling Grand Gallery. Today, you're slipping quietly into a room no one can quite explain. A place that carries a name out of respect, not certainty. The so-called Queen's Chamber. Your torchlight flickers as you descend into the tight passage. The limestone walls close in around you, still slightly cool from the morning air, but warming fast. The Queen's Chamber sits about halfway up the pyramid, right between the lower subterranean chamber and the lofty King's Chamber. Not low enough to feel forgotten, not high enough to feel exalted. Just suspended. It feels like a trap, or a trick. You duck into the chamber and freeze. It's empty, of course. No sarcophagus, no carvings, no treasure. Just a small, strangely serene room with a pointed gable ceiling and the kind of silence that presses on your ears. You hold the torch higher. The walls are smooth, no inscriptions, no symbols, not a single hieroglyph. This is supposed to be a queen's tomb. It feels more like a waiting room for eternity. Neat, symmetrical, unsettlingly blank. Your guide says nothing. He simply walks to the far wall and gestures to a rectangular indentation on the east side. At first, you think it's just a design element, some long-lost decorative niche. But then you remember the diagrams. You've seen this before. This is where the shafts begin again. 2 narrow shafts exit the Queen's Chamber, one to the north and one to the south. Like the ones in the King's Chamber, these two rise at steep angles, but unlike their upper counterparts, they don't reach the outside of the pyramid. They stop, dead ends, which of course has made everyone even more obsessed with them. You crouch beside the southern shaft's opening. It's barely wide enough to fit a fist. In 1993, a small robot was sent up this exact shaft. You picture it, a wheeled device with a camera and a copper coil inching through darkness. For over 60 meters, it climbed until it reached a slab of stone, an apparent door with 2 strange copper handles embedded in it. Handles. In a shaft no human could ever enter. And here's your historical fact. In 2002, another robot was sent up the shaft, drilled a hole through the slab and found another chamber and another stone, with strange markings. Nothing else. Just a dead end behind a dead end, as if someone had built the shaft not for access, but for secrecy. Seals, your guide mutters. One layer at a time. You stare into the shaft and feel the weight of that idea. Not just architecture, but containment. And the big question remains, what are they trying to hide? You hear about another theory, one so fringe it barely makes the gossip circle at camp, that the Queen's Chamber is not a tomb at all, but a resonance chamber, an acoustic node in the pyramid structure. Some say the room sings at a certain frequency, that when you chant the right pitch the walls vibrate in harmony. You test it, quietly, a low hum, a deep vowel sound, the kind that rolls from your throat like distant thunder. Nothing happens at first. Then a slight echo returns, not sharp but rolling, like something inside the stone is breathing with you. Your guide doesn't react. He's heard it before. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some researchers believe the pyramid was constructed with sonic engineering in mind, that its geometry, proportions and materials were designed to channel sound, amplify it, maybe even transform it. There are people today who claim the pyramid can resonate at frequencies that affect the human body, even the brain. Healing tones, some say. Others go darker, suggesting it was a kind of transmitter, or a lock, waiting for the right frequency to open something ancient. You're not buying it, not completely, but you stay very still and hum again. And for a moment, the air in the Queen's Chamber feels thick, vibrant, like a tuning fork struck deep in the earth. Your guide finally speaks. Not her chamber, he says. You blink. Whose then? He shrugs. No one's. Maybe everyone's. That's when you notice something else. At the western wall is a curious niche cut deep into the stone. Too shallow to be a passage, too tall to be a shelf. It's architectural nonsense. Unless it had a purpose no one today understands. Some think it held a statue. Others believe it was symbolic. A womb, a portal, a symbolic passageway for the soul. You touch the edge of the niche. It's cold. Perfectly cut. Just like everything else in this place. Here's the scholarly debate. What was the Queen's Chamber actually for? Egyptologists don't agree. There's no record of a queen buried there. No funerary goods, no hieroglyphs. Some think it was abandoned mid-construction. Others argue it had a ritual purpose tied to the pharaoh's rebirth, or the journey of the Ka, the spirit. Then there are those who think it was central to the pyramid's entire function. Not as a chamber of death, but a chamber of activation. You sit in the centre of the chamber and close your eyes. The floor is smooth beneath you, slightly concave. You breathe slowly and let the quiet settle into your bones. The idea that this space, this room with no name, was built as the precise centre of energy in a 6 million ton machine doesn't feel so ridiculous now. It feels obvious. When you step outside again, the light is blinding. The sun has crept high over the plateau. Workers are still at it. Stone still moves. Sweat still pours. The rhythm of construction hasn't paused in 4,500 years. But something shifted in your understanding. Not everything in the pyramid is meant to be walked through. Some places, like the Queen's Chamber, aren't for the body, they're for the mind. You return to your tent that night with the sound of your own voice still echoing inside your head, vibrating against the memory of stone. The idea of a structure designed not just for burial or ritual or alignment, but resonance, won't leave you. And tomorrow you'll climb higher, into the Grand Gallery, the strangest hallway on Earth, a place that doesn't feel like a corridor at all, more like a circuit. The morning sun cuts hard across the limestone blocks, throwing long, sharp shadows that slice across the base of the pyramid. You squint up toward the entrance, where a handful of workers are unloading baskets of tools, ropes, and something that looks suspiciously like a copper tuning fork. You're not on hauling duty today, or chisel detail. No, today you're going up into the Grand Gallery. And that word gallery is almost insulting, honestly, because this isn't a hallway. It's not a corridor. It's not even an architectural feature. It's something else. You duck inside the familiar opening, past the descending passage and the ascending ramp you've seen a dozen times by now, and then you reach it. The space opens in a way that feels like someone designed it to impress without admitting they were trying to impress you. The ceiling climbs up in steps, layer upon layer, like stone ribs curving into a hollow spine. It's vast, around 28 feet high and over 150 feet long, and yet somehow it doesn't feel spacious. It feels focused, directed, like standing inside a giant stone lung, or the interior of a machine built for a god-sized operator. Your guide, different today, lean, older, quieter, doesn't say much. Just hands you a small oil lamp and a set of thin bronze rods. You ask what they're for. He shrugs. Balance. Great. As you ascend the long sloping ramp through the Grand Gallery, your footsteps echo in a way that's hard to pin down. Not sharp, like in a canyon, and not dead, like in a tunnel. It's contained. Each sound seems to bounce off the tiered walls, swirling in some strange acoustic spiral, like the room was designed not for movement, but vibration. Halfway up you stop. You can't help it. The gallery feels like it's pulling you upward. The angle's not steep, but there's something else, an urgency, like something is waiting at the end. You ask the guide what this place is for. He says nothing, just points back the way you came and mutters, "You passed the King's Chamber." You freeze. Wait, what? You're in the pyramid. You've been inside it. You know the layout, and yet the Grand Gallery doesn't lead directly to the King's Chamber. It bypasses the central line of the structure. It rises at a steep angle, like it's pointing at something more important than the burial room, more functional, and that's the part no one talks about. Here's your historical fact for today. The Grand Gallery is one of the most enigmatic architectural features in the entire pyramid. No inscriptions, no art, no evidence of a religious ceremony. But inside this space are 7 overlapping stone ledges on each wall, like giant shelves, each receding slightly inward. Some believe they were used to guide massive counterweights, part of a pulley system that lifted blocks up the inner chambers. Others think they were symbolic, a staircase to the heavens, or even something musical. Your guide suddenly hums, a low tone. Just one long, drawn-out note. It bounces, climbs, changes. Your spine tightens. He nods for you to join. You hum too, unsure at first, but then louder. The 2 tones meet and something happens. A standing wave, a weird vibration in the floor. You feel it in your knees, your ribs, even your teeth. It's not loud, but it's felt. Your voice is part of the gallery now. He grins just a little. Like a flute, he says, but buried in stone. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Certain researchers believe the Grand Gallery was part of an energy system. Yes, energy. As in, the pyramid wasn't just a tomb or a monument, it was a machine. And this gallery, the resonance chamber. They point to the peculiar acoustics, the precise angles, the use of granite in key locations, a rock with piezoelectric properties, and the cavity-like design that seems way too advanced for pure symbolism. Some even believe the pyramid could have harnessed Earth's natural electromagnetic field. Not to light bulbs, calm down, but maybe to create subtle effects, or to focus intent. You reach the top of the gallery, breathless, not from the climb, but from the idea that this might not be a hallway at all. Your guide gestures to a small passage up ahead, the entrance to the so-called King's Chamber, but he doesn't take you there yet. Instead, he leads you to a recessed shelf in the wall where a long, smoothed groove has been carved into the stone. Not part of the pathway, not decorative. Just odd. You run your fingers through it. It's polished. Used. For what, you ask, and your guide smiles again. That's the part we're not supposed to talk about. You're starting to sense that's a theme here. Here's the scholarly debate. Was the Grand Gallery a functional element of construction, or something ritualistic? Mainstream theories suggest it helped move heavy granite blocks via ropes and counterweights, allowing precise placement in the king's chamber. But there's no direct evidence of this. Others argue it was symbolic or ceremonial, a passage the pharaoh's soul would travel through on the way to the afterlife. Then there are those who go full mystery school and claim the gallery was designed for altered states of consciousness. The angles, the acoustics, the energy. You sit at the top step, legs dangling, staring back down the slope. It looks less like a hallway from this angle, and more like a portal. Like it was meant to guide something upward, not a person. Maybe not even something physical. Your guide finally gestures toward the king's chamber. You'll go there next, but not just to see a granite box in an empty room. No, now you're wondering if the chamber itself was the final destination, or just another component in whatever this machine was trying to do. You descend slowly, watching the light of your lamp dance across the ridged walls. The sound of your feet is barely audible, yet every scuff seems to echo. The gallery is quiet again, but the tension hasn't left. It's still humming. That night, back at camp, you lie awake long after the fires die down. The stars spin overhead, and for once, Orion isn't the only thing pulling your attention. You keep thinking of that strange groove in the gallery wall, the way the sound felt more than it was heard. You imagine the pyramid alive, humming like a chord held over centuries. Tomorrow you'll enter the king's chamber, and you're beginning to wonder if that big empty granite box really is just a coffin. You don't enter the king's chamber casually. You approach it the way you approach a lion in tall grass, quiet, alert, with a healthy understanding that if anything in this place can rearrange your molecules, it's probably in that room. You duck through a narrow passage just off the top of the grand gallery, your oil lamp flickering against the cold granite walls. Unlike the rest of the pyramid, which is largely limestone, soft, pale, warm to the touch, the king's chamber is carved entirely from massive blocks of red granite hauled from Aswan nearly 600 miles away. It feels deliberate, and when you step inside it feels off. The room is a perfect rectangle, about 34 feet long, 17 feet wide and 19 feet high, with smooth, seamless walls and a flat ceiling made of 9 monolithic granite beams. There's nothing ornamental, no carvings, no paint, no gold, just stone. Pure, heavy, ancient stone. It smells faintly metallic, and the temperature drops noticeably. It's not just cooler, it's sharper, like the air has more structure here. And then there's the box. They call it a sarcophagus, but that's being generous. It sits at the western end of the chamber, a dark granite rectangle with no lid, no inscriptions, no royal flair, just a cold, open box big enough for a tall man to lie in. You approach it like it might wake up, run your hands along. The rim. The interior is smooth, yes, but not polished. It has a rawness to it. Tool marks, faint scuffs, a precision that's less decorative and more mechanical. You've seen coffins. This doesn't feel like one. Your guide, now unusually silent, stands near the door. You ask him what happens in here. He answers with a phrase that gives you more questions than clarity. This is where the king becomes the signal. Okay, great. You walk the perimeter of the room. The granite beams overhead are absurdly massive, each one weighing around 50 tons. They're stacked in a 5-tiered system called a relieving chamber, meant to redirect the weight of the pyramid and prevent collapse. But even that feels like an understatement. You've seen cathedrals with less architectural drama. Why this much effort to protect an empty room? Here's your historical fact. No body has ever been found in the king's chamber. No treasures, no bones, no inscriptions naming Khufu or any other pharaoh. Yet mainstream Egyptology still insists it's a tomb, built to hold the pharaoh's sarcophagus, looted long ago. But here's the problem. You can't fit the granite box through the passageways. It's bigger than the entrance tunnels, which means it was placed here before the room was finished, before the walls closed in. That suggests planning. intention. This box wasn't added, it was built around. You lie down inside it, which feels either very brave or very stupid. The interior surprisingly smooth, cool. You close your eyes, and something strange happens. Your breath feels louder, your heartbeat echoes. The walls hum faintly, like you're inside an amplifier. You can't explain it. The box isn't vibrating, you are. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some researchers claim that the King's Chamber, and specifically the granite box, functions as a resonator. That its dimensions are tuned to certain frequencies, particularly around 440 Hz and its harmonics. Sound tests have revealed that the room sustains and amplifies low frequencies in a way that's, frankly, bizarre. Ancient acoustics, ancient acousticians, even stranger, some experiments with audio tones and chanting have caused participants to enter trance states. People describe pressure changes, disorientation, even visual phenomena. Was it just the power of suggestion, or something about the stone itself? You climb out, a little shaky. Your guide is watching you like he's seen this before. He steps to the box, places both hands on it, and whispers something you can't hear. A prayer, maybe, or a code. Then he leads you to the upper shafts. Those narrow, precise channels that exit the King's Chamber at perfect angles, aimed directly at Orion and Polaris. We talked about these before, but up close they're even weirder. Smooth, straight, and completely inaccessible without modern tools. Yet they exist, cut through solid granite. Some call them star shafts. Some say they're soul highways. Some, well, we'll get there. Here's your scholarly debate. Was the King's Chamber actually intended as a burial chamber, or was it the core of some other purpose entirely? Critics of the tomb theory argue that a burial site wouldn't need resonance chambers, granite beams, and star shafts. They point to the room's unique materials, its acoustic properties, and its isolation as evidence of a different function. Possibly ritual, possibly energetic, maybe even technological. Traditional Egyptologists hold the line, it's a tomb, just an unusually robust one. You sit with your back against the wall, trying to process all of this. You think about the layout of the pyramid, subterranean chamber, queen's chamber, grand gallery, king's chamber. It doesn't feel like a burial monument. It feels like a sequence, a circuit. Each chamber more intense than the last, each one more focused, more purposeful, and at the centre of it all, this room, this box, this stone amplifier. You walk slowly back toward the entrance, heart still thrumming in your chest. On the way out, you glance up at the relieving chambers, those granite beams stacked above the ceiling. You ask the guide if anyone's ever been up there. He smiles a little, once, and maybe, never again. That night you lie awake again, and you realise something horrifying and wonderful. What if the pyramid is still doing what it was built to do? Whatever that is. Tomorrow you'll explore what the workers left behind, graffiti, campsites, logistics. But tonight, the King's Chamber stays with you. Not because of what's in it, but because of what isn't. You wake up with your ears still ringing, as if the granite box inside the King's Chamber had left a little echo behind, just for you. Or maybe you left part of yourself in there. Either way, you're back in the world of sunlight, dust, and shouting foremen. It's easy to forget, with all the talk of star shafts and sound frequencies, that this place was also a construction zone. Loud, chaotic, sweaty, and full of people who just wanted to get paid and go home. So today, you're heading out of the pyramid and into the village that actually made it all happen. The workers' camp. It's not a fancy place. No polished limestone, no sacred geometry. Just rows of low mud brick buildings, crumbling ovens, scattered bits of pottery, and the overwhelming smell of onions, sweat, and old beer. But it's real. More real than any theory. You walk among what's left of the people who made the impossible possible. And as it turns out, they had opinions. They also had time on their hands. You pass a low wall where someone's carved a tiny sketch of a man with the head of a cat, lifting a block over his head. It's crude, but hilarious. Nearby, a bigger image, roughly scratched into plaster, shows what appears to be a foreman being trampled by a donkey. You're told it's not uncommon. Workers left graffiti everywhere. Insults, jokes, names of teams, even passive-aggressive notes to other crews. And here's your historical fact. In 2013, archaeologists uncovered what are now called the gang marks, red-painted hieroglyphs inside hidden parts of the pyramid. They named the work teams the Drunkards of Menkar, the Friends of Khufu, and the rather cocky the Vigorous Gang. One chamber is even labelled the Friends of Khufu Gang above the ceiling beams in the King's Chamber, meaning the workers left their tag inside the most sacred space in the whole pyramid. Casual. You're led through what's left of the workers' village, low-walled rooms where up to 20 men slept side by side, eating flatbread and salted fish, then hauling blocks by day. There are huge communal bakeries, garbage pits full of broken tools, and most notably, a lot of beer jugs. Apparently each worker was issued a daily ration of beer. Not the foamy, fizzy kind, you know. Think of it more like drinkable bread. Nutritious, gritty, fermented, basically ancient Gatorade with attitude. As you help sift through a layer of sand near one of the kitchens, you find a fish hook and a tiny clay bead. Someone nearby digs up a human tooth. They hold it up like treasure, then casually toss it into a bucket. Life was rough, short, but not joyless. You overhear someone singing, not a religious chant, just a work song with a rhythm that matches the memory of hauling sleds across wet sand. Here's the quirky fringe fact for the day. Some alternative historians love to imagine that aliens, levitation, or long-lost super tech were needed to build the pyramid. But the graffiti, the trash pits, the half-finished blocks and chipped tools, they're a buzzkill to all that. These weren't interdimensional monks with anti-gravity wands. These were people. People who sweated and cursed and got splinters. If aliens built the pyramids, they sure made a mess doing it. You meet a man named Dedi, a kind of site administrator. His job is logistics, food, tools, transportation. He runs you through the numbers like a proud manager. Thousands of workers, tens of thousands of tools, animals, carts, boats, replacement parts. It is not magic, he says. It is a very large lunch problem. He waves his hand toward a stone-lined pit. That used to be a bakery. We made 20,000 loaves a day, more if the king was watching. Dedi hands you a wax tablet etched with a week's inventory. Barley, onions, copper, fish, charcoal. You ask how much they needed to feed the whole team. He laughs and says, all of it, always. Here's your scholarly debate. Were the pyramid builders slaves, conscripts, or paid workers? The answer is still debated, but more and more evidence suggests they were skilled labourers, well fed and rotated in seasonal crews. Many were likely farmers during flood season, when the Nile covered their fields. Some even brought their families. They weren't prisoners. They were part of a national project, one that probably felt more like civic duty than oppression. But still, the work was brutal, the injuries were real, and not everyone made it out. You pass by a burial pit with a few skeletons half exposed, crushed legs, broken spines. These weren't pharaohs, these were the guys doing the lifting. One of the archaeologists nearby says something that sticks with you. They died under the stones, but they're also in the stones. Their sweat's in every block. Later that afternoon, you rest by a wall where someone has scratched what looks like a star chart. Not accurate, not scientific, just a kid's idea of the heavens, scratched in a moment of boredom. You wonder if that child later helped haul stone up the Grand Gallery, or maybe died trying. As the sun sets over the desert, you start to see the pyramid differently. Not as a miracle, not as a conspiracy, but as a miracle of organisation. It didn't rise from mystery. It rose from calloused hands, aching backs, shouted orders, and daily beer rations. It was built by people who probably never saw the top finished, never got thanked, and never imagined a future where tourists with cameras would call it a mystery. And yet, even with all the practical evidence, the graffiti, the broken tools, the sarcastic donkey drawings, you still can't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening here. These workers might not have known what the pyramid was for, but they knew it mattered. You fall asleep that night with the sounds of the village in your head. Laughter, songs, hammering, the hiss of baking bread, and you wonder what it must have felt like to be part of something so much bigger than yourself. Tomorrow, you'll return to the pyramid, but not to climb it, to question it. Because the theory that it was just a tomb is beginning to feel small. It's your day off, technically. No hauling, no chiselling, no deciphering faint lines on worn papyri in candlelit rooms while a scribe watches you like he's already writing your obituary. You're supposed to be resting, maybe helping move water jugs or counting copper tools that will wear out in a week anyway. But instead, You find yourself standing at the base of the pyramid again, arms crossed, squinting up at its massive flanks like you're waiting for it to admit something. Because here's the thing, you've been in the king's chamber, you've laid in the box, you've seen the star shafts, you've listened to the hum of the grand gallery, you've heard songs echo inside a stone machine that nobody really understands, and yet everyone still insists, almost out of habit, that this place is a tomb, a glorified coffin. You're not buying it. You walk along the north face, pacing the ancient stone like a suspicious detective, until you're joined by someone you've seen around but never spoken to, an older man, hunched, wrapped in dusty linen, with a face like he's been sun-dried since the Second Dynasty. He says nothing at first, just walks beside you for a while, then finally mutters, "It doesn't feel like a tomb, does it?" And that's all it takes. You stop. Then what is it? He doesn't answer directly. Of course he doesn't. Instead, he waves you along and leads you to a tent near the edge of the workers' village. Inside is a model, a miniature of the pyramid, perfectly scaled, carved in wood, and sliced open like a dollhouse. It shows the subterranean chamber, the Queen's chamber, the Grand Gallery, the King's chamber, all the parts, and a few more you don't recognize. The man taps on the model's base. "It's not for the body," he says. "It's for the current." You look at him, blank. "Energy," he says. "Movement. Flow." He lays out a series of crude diagrams showing water channels beneath the pyramid, subterranean aquifers, flowing groundwater. He draws waves, sound waves. He draws copper rods and, yes, this part gets weird, what looks like a coil. You're officially in the fringe now, deep in the part of the pyramid story where history starts slipping into conspiracy. Still, you listen. Because here's your historical fact. The Great Pyramid was never found to contain a mummy. Despite being the biggest, most famous, most impressive of all the pyramids, there's no body. No burial artifacts, no wall inscriptions, no "Here lies Khufu" message carved in solemn hieroglyphs. Just that granite box, empty, and way too plain for a pharaoh. Tombs don't usually come with air shafts aligned to stars, massive resonating chambers, and stonework so precise it rivals modern machining. So you start asking around, quietly, carefully. You talk to a few temple priests, a retired architect, a half-mad stonemason who hasn't blinked in hours, and the theory that starts to form is wild, but not new. They think the pyramid was a kind of machine, a device, a structure designed to do something, not just sit there. Some say it was a power plant, that the chambers were designed to manipulate frequencies, that the granite beams in the king's chamber focused vibrational energy, like a tuning fork trapped inside a massive limestone amplifier, that the queen's chamber once held chemical substances, possibly even acids or conductive materials, that the subterranean chamber wasn't symbolic, it was functional, a resonator, a pump, a battery, that the water from the Nile flowing beneath the bedrock may have played a role in the process. You laugh at first, then stop, because none of it is provable, but all of it fits. Here's your quirky fringe fact. A man named Christopher Dunn, a modern engineer, once proposed the idea that the pyramid was an ancient power plant. His theory, completely unaccepted by mainstream scholars, suggests that the layout of the pyramid mimics a hydrogen-based energy system. He pointed out the materials, the layout, even the scorch marks on the ceiling of the king's chamber as potential evidence of energy output. It sounds ridiculous, until you realize you've stood in that chamber, and it really doesn't feel like a tomb. Even more fringe, there are theories that the pyramid once had a golden capstone, now long gone, that served as a conductor, that when combined with the crystalline structure of the granite and the position of the pyramid on the Earth's energy grid, yes, there are maps of that, it formed a kind of energy antenna, maybe not for electricity as we know it, maybe something subtler, something we've forgotten. Here's the scholarly debate. Was the Great Pyramid built purely as a tomb, or did it have a secondary unknown function, technological, ritualistic, or otherwise? Mainstream Egyptology holds fast to the tomb theory, backed by comparison with other pyramids, even if no body was found. But alternative researchers argue that the design is too advanced, too carefully aligned, and too lacking in burial content to support that. The truth? Still up for grabs. You step back from the model, head buzzing, a little embarrassed by how much of this is starting to make sense, not as fact, but as possibility. The old man looks at you, eyes sharp under heavy lids. "We always build for the dead," he says. "But what if we built this for the living? Or for the sky?" That line sticks with you. Later that night you lie in the sand, staring up again at Orion, and you start to see the pyramid not as a monument to death, but a tool for transformation. Something that turns sound into structure, water into power, man into God. And if that's true, what happened when it was on? Tomorrow you're going to find out what's beneath the pyramid. Not the desert, not the base, the places no one's allowed to go, not even most Egyptians. The dark parts, the buried ones, the ones that whisper. They don't take you through the main entrance. There's no ceremony, no priestly guide with riddles and copper measuring rods, no dusty foreman barking orders. Instead, you follow a quiet man with a torch and a limp down a side path behind the pyramid's northern face, into a dip in the bedrock where the sand never settles quite right. It's always shifting, like it knows there's something beneath it that still stirs. The entrance is hidden behind what looks like a collapsed stone slab, half covered by time. You wouldn't have noticed it even if you were standing on top of it. The man pulls aside a sheet of linen. Why it's there, you don't ask, and ducks into the narrow gap. You follow. Welcome to the underbelly. The passage is tight and damp, chiselled straight into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. The walls are rough, unfinished, a sharp contrast to the perfect symmetry above. You have to crawl in places, contort in others. The air smells of minerals and something older, like stagnant water trapped in stone. And then the floor starts to slope downward. You've heard of this place. The so-called subterranean chamber, the lowest point inside the Great Pyramid. Carved directly into the limestone foundation, it's often dismissed as a false start, a construction experiment abandoned when the builders changed plans. But now that you're here, it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like intention. After what feels like forever, the tunnel opens into a large, crude chamber. The ceiling is high, far higher than you expected, and the floor dips into a square pit carved deeper into the rock, like someone wanted to keep digging but ran out of nerve, or light, or permission. You shine your lamp around, no decorations, no sarcophagus, just this massive chiselled void. Here's your historical fact. The subterranean chamber is one of the oldest parts of the pyramid. It lies nearly 100 feet below ground level, and its walls are unfinished, unlike the smooth limestone and polished granite above. Egyptologists believe it was either an abandoned burial chamber or part of an earlier plan that was later replaced by the more elaborate rooms above. But if that's true, why finish the access tunnels? Why shape the room at all? You walk toward the pit in the chamber floor. It's deep. Too deep to see the bottom without leaning dangerously close. A rope ladder dangles from one side, clearly added later. Much later. Your guide gestures to it and says, "Below is where the whispers start." You chuckle. He doesn't. You descend. The pit's walls close around you as the light shrinks above. At the bottom the air feels heavy. Oppressive. You're in a small square chamber within the chamber, like a matryoshka of stone. Someone has carved grooves into the floor. Shallow, intentional, not drainage, not tool marks, patterns, or maybe a grid. Your guide joins you and lights a second torch. He walks slowly around the chamber, tapping the walls, then stops, listens, taps again. A hollow sound. Not loud, but real. He places your hand against the wall. You feel a faint vibration, like something breathing. You don't ask if it's a trick of the stone. You already know the answer won't help you sleep. Here's your quirky fringe fact. A handful of researchers, mostly dismissed by academic circles, believe the subterranean chamber wasn't a mistake or a burial site. They say it was a resonance chamber, designed to focus low-frequency vibrations generated by the Earth itself, tied to natural geomagnetic pulses, a sort of deep Earth antenna. Some go further, claiming it was the tuning center for the entire pyramid, syncing its structure to the heartbeat of the planet. Even more fringe, there are whispers of tunnels beneath this chamber. Real tunnels, sealed, flooded, or just forgotten. In the 20th century, explorers found a well shaft extending down even further. They ran out of rope before they reached the bottom. No one talks about what they heard echoing up from below. Your guide mentioned something, called the River Below, a local legend. He says that during certain flood seasons the limestone here vibrates differently. That water flows beneath the pyramid, not just rain, but old water, water that hasn't seen sunlight since before the First Dynasty. It carries memory, he says, and other things. Okay, here's the scholarly debate. Is the subterranean chamber merely a construction leftover, or does it serve a ritual or technological function? Traditional archaeology says it was part of an early plan for a burial chamber that was scrapped when the king's chamber was designed. Others argue that its depth and structure suggest intentional placement, part of an energetic system, or a symbolic descent into the underworld, tying into the pharaoh's journey through death and rebirth. You sit at the bottom of the pit for a while. You hum, just to test. The sound rolls upward, spiralling along the walls, and seems to double back on itself. You swear it changes pitch when it comes back. Your guide hums with you, and for a few seconds you harmonise with the stone. It feels weirdly right, like you're completing something. Then the torch dims. You climb back out. On your way up, you catch sight of something carved into the wall. Faint, almost invisible unless you shine the light just right. Not hieroglyphs, not symbols, numbers, 3 sets, aligned like coordinates. You memorise them without knowing why. Back outside, the pyramid looms above you. You realise you've been beneath the largest structure on Earth, and it's not just foundation down there, it's function. That night, you dream of deep water, of something old and patient pulsing beneath your feet, of a voice humming in a pitch you've never heard but somehow understand. And tomorrow you'll head up again, into the grand gallery, into the alignment of stars. But this time, you'll carry the sound of the earth with you. The pyramid isn't just built on bedrock, it interacts with it. You wake with dust in your throat and the thrum of low, impossible frequencies still echoing in your chest. It takes you a moment to remember you're not dreaming. You were really in the subterranean chamber yesterday, deep beneath the Great Pyramid, crouched in darkness while the earth itself seemed to hum around you like some ancient instrument that no one remembers how to play. You half expect your ears to still be ringing, but instead, everything is silent. Too silent. Like something is waiting. Today, you're going back in, but this time, you're not walking through passages anyone can see. You're chasing shadows, voids, strange anomalies inside the pyramid that shouldn't be there, and yet somehow are. Your guide today isn't a builder or a priest. He's a foreigner, a scientist with instruments that glow, hum and click in ways that instantly irritate the traditionalists. He calls it non-invasive substructure imaging. You call it a ghost hunt with gadgets. He hands you a tablet, sleek, faintly glowing, and shows you a heat map of the pyramid's interior. Red blotches indicate heat retention. Blue shows cold density. But what catches your eye are the black zones. Cool voids, shaped like corridors and chambers, where no known passages exist. One in particular stands out, a massive cavity sitting just above the grand gallery, stretching horizontally across the pyramid's core. It's long, almost cathedral-sized, but there's no access to it. No tunnel, no staircase, just blank stone and this hollow shape picked up by Muon tomography. Here's your historical fact. In 2017, a team using particle physics, yes, particle physics, discovered a mysterious void above the Grand Gallery. It's over 100 feet long and at least 30 feet tall, and it's still not accessible. No one knows why it exists. The scan data is solid. The pyramid's been hiding it for over 4,500 years. The Egyptian authorities labelled it the Big Void. Creative, right? You stare at the model again. If the Grand Gallery was already weird, tall, resonant and geometrically perfect, then this chamber above it is the pyramid's ghost. It mirrors the gallery, almost like a shadow corridor nested within the mass of stone. Your guide suggests it may have once housed a counterweight system, or it could be symbolic, or unfinished. But he doesn't sound convinced. You're not either, so you do the only logical thing. You try to find a way in. You and the small team are led to a cramped side corridor off the upper passage. It's sealed at the end by what looks like a patchwork wall, uneven, slightly sunken, as if built in haste. The scientist places a sensor on it. It chirps. The readings show a faint drop in density behind the wall. Not a tunnel, but a pocket. A ripple in the otherwise perfect solid stone. Could be structural, he mutters, or something we're not supposed to find. Your guide, who's been quiet until now, places his hand on the wall and simply says, "Echoes." You don't ask him to elaborate. You already know you wouldn't understand. Here's your quirky fringe fact. There are researchers who believe the pyramid's voids, and even its known chambers, are laid out according to a musical scale, that each chamber represents a harmonic node, and the entire structure is designed as a resonance chamber for the Earth itself. Others say the voids may house ancient technologies, sealed away when they were no longer safe. One theory goes so far as to say the voids act like capacitors in a massive energy circuit, completely bonkers, unless you've stood in the Grand Gallery and felt it hum back at you. You walk back down to the gallery, slowly, tracing your hand along the stepped ledges again. They don't feel like decoration anymore, they feel like components, as if each groove, each tier, was part of a function now lost to time, and then the guide stops you. He points to a stone block high above, the gallery's ceiling invisible from below unless you know exactly where to look. It's discoloured, darker, a repair job, a marker, or an access point. Above that, he says, the void starts there. You sit on the edge of the gallery floor, feet dangling, and let the silence settle. You imagine the unseen space above you, a void big enough to hold a cathedral, sealed away for 4,000 years. No entrance, no exit. Just there. Like a memory trapped in stone. Here's your scholarly debate. Why would the pyramid contain vast, sealed chambers that serve no obvious purpose? One camp argues they're structural, a byproduct of weight distribution, used to relieve stress on lower levels. Others say they're symbolic, or functional in ways we no longer understand. The problem is, no one can get inside them, and until someone does, the big void remains either the greatest accident in architecture, or the greatest secret in history. Later, back in the tent, the scientist shows you one final scan, a recent one. It shows faint anomalies not just above the gallery, but deep beneath the pyramid as well. Curving lines, grid-like formations. His voice drops low. This part doesn't match any known geology. You ask what it does match. He hesitates, then flips to a new image. It looks like a spiral. Not a tunnel, not a staircase. Something else. Maybe the remnants of that long-theorized internal ramp, or maybe a different kind of spiral, one that loops through stone like a coil. Looks like a helix, he says. Almost genetic. You stare at the image. Something cold passes through your chest. That night, you don't sleep. You walk alone up to the pyramid and sit against its base. It looms above you, ancient and silent. But now you know it's not solid. It's riddled with secrets. It's full of voids, hollow spaces, perfectly cut and deliberately hidden. And every time someone gets close to understanding it, something new appears. A new cavity, a new echo, a new whisper. Tomorrow, you're going to explore the Grand Gallery again, but with new eyes. Not as a hallway, but as a clue, because maybe the pyramid doesn't want to be understood. Maybe it just wants to be activated. The Grand Gallery doesn't hit the same way now. Not after you've seen the scans. Not after standing beneath it, deep in the belly of the pyramid, and realizing there's another entire chamber above you that no one can reach. You stand at the base of the sloped passage and look up, but instead of thinking, wow, that's big, you think, what is it doing? Because now you know this isn't just a passage, it's a line, a vector, a bridge between something deep and dark below and something unseen and sealed above. It's not a hallway, it's a wire. The climb is familiar but slower this time. Your feet find each ledge like you're walking the same notes on an instrument one by one. You count the steps without meaning to. Jasun, on each wall, rising like terraces, then 7 again, sacred number, sacred slope. Even the angle of the gallery, 26 degrees, is suspiciously specific. Not quite a staircase, not quite a ramp. Something between, something precise. Halfway up, your guide meets you. Not the scientist this time, not the priest, not the scribe with his feathers and his math. This one's different. Younger, quieter, barefoot. He says nothing, just nods, and leads you forward with a hand gesture like a magician preparing to vanish. He takes you to the very top, where the gallery levels off and meets the antechamber before the king's chamber. But instead of going through, he stops and shows you a small, almost invisible detail. A groove in the wall, a stone rail. It looks unimportant, until you realize it runs the entire width of the passage. Then you notice there's a second groove on the opposite wall, and a third, vertical, parallel, like tracks. You ask what it was for. He says, "They moved something heavy, but not just up." He points down the slope. "They lowered it too. Here's your historical fact. The Grand Gallery contains unusual features, grooves, niches, and a long central trench, suggesting it was used for more than just foot traffic. Some researchers believe it housed a counterweight system, massive stones attached to ropes and pulleys, raised and lowered to move other blocks into place, especially the massive granite slabs above the king's chamber. There's no direct evidence, just geometry, just scars. And here's the thing, those granite slabs, they weigh up to 70 tons each. You've seen what it takes to move a single 2-ton block. Whatever happened in this gallery wasn't brute force. It was engineering, precision, purpose. The guide asks you to sit. You do. And then, out of nowhere, he begins to sing. Not words, not melody, just a tone. Long, steady, impossibly low. It resonates. You feel it in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. You join him without meaning to. Your voice finds the note, matches it, and when it does, the air changes. You hear something buzz faintly high above. Not an echo, not feedback, a sound from somewhere else. He stops, smiles. Now imagine that sound in the stone, every day, for years. You start to see it. Not workers shouting, but chanting. Not ropes creaking, but pulleys singing. A gallery filled with rhythm, vibration, and purpose. The grooves are not just mechanical, they're musical. And the function of the gallery wasn't just to move blocks, but to amplify something. Here's your quirky fringe fact. There's a theory that the pyramid was tuned like an instrument. Some believe the specific dimensions of the Grand Gallery correspond to harmonic frequencies, that its shape was designed to resonate, possibly to enhance sound waves or even focus energy. One theory suggests that the act of moving heavy stones through this space, swinging, sliding, striking, would generate massive sustained vibrations, like striking the strings of a harp the size of a mountain. The guide leads you to the midpoint of the gallery. There's a square recess in the floor here, like a hatch, but sealed. It doesn't go to the king's chamber, it doesn't go down to the subterranean chamber, it goes nowhere. You ask what it's for, he says, "Input." Input of what? He doesn't answer, but he's smiling again. That same cryptic, slightly unnerving smile you've seen on 3 different men in 3 different parts of the pyramid. You sit with your back against the stone wall, staring up at the tiers above you. The gallery feels more like a circuit board than ever, and suddenly you see it in your mind. Water flowing through the subterranean channels below, vibrations moving upward, sound resonating in the Queen's chamber, counterweights sliding through this gallery, granite beams focusing frequency in the King's chamber, and above all that, the big void, a capacitor, a collector, a battery. Here's your scholarly debate. Was the Grand Gallery purely a functional corridor, or did it serve a deeper, possibly energetic role? Traditional Egyptology still leans toward the idea that it was simply a grand staircase for moving blocks, an impressive piece of logistics. But others argue that its shape, materials, and unexplained features suggest an acoustic or energetic purpose. Without inscriptions or documentation, the purpose remains speculation. But the clues are there, hiding in plain geometry. You begin the slow walk back down. Every footstep echoes differently now, more meaningful, more deliberate. You imagine the ropes, the pulleys, the massive counterweights swinging down these rails. You imagine a machine that worked not with electricity but with gravity, with sound, with flow. Outside, the sun is blinding. You shield your eyes and glance up at the pyramid. Still silent, still unmoving, still unreadable. But maybe that's the point. The pyramid doesn't tell you what it is. It shows you what it could be, and lets you decide. Tomorrow you'll explore the theory that Khufu didn't build this at all, that he found it, claimed it, put his name on it like a signature scrawled onto someone else's invention. Because as strange as the pyramid's design is, the story of who built it might be stranger. You're used to the idea of kings stamping their names on things they didn't build. Modern leaders do it all the time. Take credit for a bridge, a dam, an economy. But when it comes to the Great Pyramid, the idea that Pharaoh Khufu just walked up, slapped his name on the side and called it his, feels almost unthinkable. And yet, the more you dig, the more that possibility stops sounding ridiculous and starts sounding probable. Because here's the dirty little secret of the Great Pyramid. there's barely any evidence tying Khufu to it at all. Sure, the textbooks tell you it was built during his reign, somewhere around 2580 BCE, that he reigned for a couple of decades, and that during that time this enormous, absurdly perfect structure was somehow planned, built, and finished under his rule. But aside from a tiny handful of graffiti scrawled inside a hidden chamber, the Friends of Khufu gang, you won't find his name carved grandly on any temple wall, no triumphant reliefs of him overseeing construction, no golden cartouches crowning the entrance. It's suspiciously quiet. Today, you're visiting Khufu's actual tomb, or more precisely what's supposed to be his tomb, a modest little structure buried in the shadow of the Great Pyramid. You expect something grand, monumental, but when you get there, it's shockingly small. A pit, some stones, a shell of what you'd imagine for the man who allegedly built the largest stone structure on Earth. You glance back at the Great Pyramid, so close, so out of reach, and then at this cramped pit. The disconnect is jarring. Your guide today is an old priest with a limp and a voice like gravel. He walks with you around the empty ruin and says nothing for the first hour. Just lets the awkward silence linger until your thoughts are loud enough to ask the question out loud. Did Khufu build it? The priest doesn't answer, not directly. Instead, he gestures toward the Great Pyramid's base, where a crumbling wall surrounds a row of sunken tombs. These are for workers, overseers, maybe architects. Their names are better preserved than Khufu's, their stories clearer, their presence undeniable, and yet the man whose name defines the structure barely leaves a whisper. Here's your historical fact. Khufu's full name, Khnum Khufu, means the god Khnum protects me. He was the second pharaoh of Egypt's 4th dynasty, and according to later Greek historians like Herodotus, he was a tyrant, a man who closed the temples, enslaved his people, and forced them to labour for decades. But modern archaeology disputes the slave narrative. Workers appear to have been well fed, buried with honour, and organised into rotating teams. Which leads to a strange middle ground. Either Khufu was mischaracterised, or someone else built the pyramid, and history just filled in the blank with a king's name. Here's the twist. Some scholars believe that Khufu renovated the pyramid, not built it. That the structure was already ancient by the time he came to power, maybe centuries old. They point to the lack of inscriptions, the scarcity of contemporary records, and the fact that Egyptian dynasties often repurposed older sites. Temples were rebuilt, statues recarved, entire tombs appropriated. And here's your quirky fringe fact. There are fringe researchers who argue that the pyramid might predate dynastic Egypt altogether, that it wasn't built in 2500 BCE, but thousands of years earlier, that it was the relic of a lost civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, take your pick, preserved and rebranded by the pharaohs. Some even claim the erosion patterns at the Sphinx suggest water damage from an era when the Sahara was lush, tens of thousands of years ago. Sound wild? Sure. But the mainstream still can't carbon date stone, which means those blocks don't tell their own story. Only the mortar between them does, and even that is contested. You leave Khufu's tomb confused, not because you found a clear answer, but because the story you've been told, king builds pyramid, dies, gets buried in it, suddenly feels more like a marketing campaign than history. And the graffiti? The famous red paint scrawled deep inside the pyramid? Let's talk about that. In the 1830s, a British explorer named Howard Vyse blasted his way into hidden chambers above the King's Chamber using gunpowder. In one of those chambers, he found graffiti with Khufu's name. Jackpot, right? Proof! Except, some now question its authenticity. The markings are unlike others of the period. They're clumsy, out of place. Too perfect, too convenient. Some suspect Vyse forged them to secure fame and funding. It's the only direct evidence linking Khufu to the pyramid. You sit near the base of the Great Pyramid, watching tourists swarm like ants over the lower stones, and you feel that growing itch again, that someone's lying to you, or maybe lying through history. Maybe not out of malice, but out of convenience. Because a mystery that's been solved is easier to explain, easier to teach, easier to sell. Here's the scholarly debate. Is Khufu truly the builder of the Great Pyramid, or simply the one who claimed it? Traditionalists hold to the graffiti, the timeline, and the association with 4th Dynasty architectural style. Critics point to the silence of the pyramid, the scale of the structure, and the suspicious lack of funerary evidence. The idea that the most perfect pyramid ever built came first, and everything after was a lesser imitation, challenges the narrative. And yet, here we are. Your guide finally speaks again. Just one sentence. We give the gods names so we can forget the builders. You walk back toward the workers' village as the sun dips low, shadows stretching long across the plateau. The pyramid follows you, not in motion but in presence, watching, waiting. Khufu's name is on the books, but was it ever on the stones? Tomorrow you'll explore the dating problem, the carbon-14 tests, the tool marks, the geological clues that hint at a timeline much, much older than anyone wants to admit. Because if Khufu didn't build it, then when was it really built? You're starting to feel it now, the tension between what you've seen and what you've been told. You've walked the tunnels, crouched in the voids, laid in the king's granite box and listened to the stone hum like a living thing. You've stared into the pit of the subterranean chamber and felt the earth answer back. You've read the textbooks and watched the documentaries, and yet none of it fully aligns. It's like trying to explain a symphony by reading the score of just one instrument. So today, you're going after the one question that really keeps archaeologists up at night. Not who built the pyramid, but when. Because here's the problem. We don't actually know. We guess. We infer. We assume. But there's no stone slab that says completed on year 23 of Khufu's reign. No date carved into the foundation. No master architect's journal buried in a time capsule beneath the capstone. And so, for decades, the date 2580 BCE has sat like a placeholder in every textbook, based largely on the reign of a pharaoh whose name barely appears in the structure itself. But science, inconvenient as ever, has been poking at that date for years now. You begin the day with a small team of researchers, not your usual mix of mystics and priests, but men and women in clean shirts with measuring devices and carbon isotope scanners. They're focused not on the pyramid itself, but on the organic materials around it. Little flecks of soot, bits of mortar, charcoal fragments in the bedding layers between blocks. That's where the real clues are. Here's your historical fact. Carbon-14 dating, while useless on the stone itself, can be applied to organic matter trapped in the mortar used between blocks. In the 1990s, samples from the Great Pyramid's mortar were analysed and the results were strange. Some came back hundreds of years older than Khufu's reign. Some even older. One set of samples pointed to a range between 3100 and 2850 BCE, centuries before Khufu ever took the throne. Skeptics called it contamination, old wood being reused, anomalies in the data. But anomalies have a way of stacking up until they stop looking accidental and start looking intentional. You crouch beside a wall at the base of the pyramid, where a narrow joint reveals a sliver of ancient mortar. One of the researchers gently scrapes a sample into a vial, sealing it like treasure. You ask her what she thinks the real date is. She shrugs. Old. Very old. But no one wants to say it out loud. You ask why. Because it breaks everything. That's the problem. If the Great Pyramid wasn't built in 2580 BCE, then it throws the entire timeline of ancient Egypt into chaos. It means the most complex, most perfectly constructed monument on Earth was built before the height of Egyptian civilization, before the valley temples, before the hieroglyphs even standardized. It means the pyramid isn't a culmination of Egyptian engineering, it's the starting point. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Certain geological clues around the pyramid and nearby structures, especially the Sphinx, suggest erosion patterns consistent with thousands of years of rainfall. The problem? The Giza Plateau hasn't seen sustained rainfall in at least 7,000 years. That means the structures may have already existed when the Sahara was still green, around 10,000 BCE. Some geologists, like Dr. Robert Schoch, have pushed this idea for years, suggesting that parts of the Giza complex, especially the Sphinx enclosure, were carved during the pre-dynastic era. Long before official Egyptian history begins, you're led next to the base of the pyramid's casing stones, those few remaining polished limestone blocks that once covered the entire structure in gleaming white. You touch them gently. They're cool, almost soft under your fingers, though the surface is rougher now, eroded and pitted by time. Some show signs of weathering, rounded edges, vertical fissures. Your guide points to one of them and says, "That doesn't come from sandstorms, that's water." He might as well have said time machine. Here's the scholarly debate. Can erosion patterns, carbon dating, and architectural complexity really suggest a pre-dynastic origin for the pyramid? Mainstream Egyptology says no. That the carbon anomalies are just from older materials being repurposed. That the erosion on the Sphinx and pyramid base is explainable by salt weathering, not rainfall. That the ancient Egyptians were perfectly capable of building pyramids without needing them to be thousands of years older than we think. And maybe that's true. But then, why does every pyramid after the Great Pyramid get worse? You ask your guide this question. He smiles. Because maybe they weren't trying to match it. Maybe they were trying to remember it. The Great Pyramid stands alone, not just in scale, but in perfection. The later pyramids, collapsed, crude, uneven. The step pyramids and bent pyramids and half-finished rubble piles, they don't show evolution, they show decline. You think about that all the way back to camp, about the idea that maybe the ancient Egyptians didn't build the pyramid, but inherited it, studied it, tried to mimic it like children copying blueprints they don't fully understand. They filled it with stories and gods and rituals, but the structure itself, that came from somewhere else, someone else. Tonight, you lie in your tent and imagine a world where the pyramid was already ancient when the Nile was young, where its foundations were laid before the Sahara dried, before the stars shifted, before Egypt was even Egypt. A world where the Great Pyramid stood not as a tomb, but as a message, or a machine, or both. And tomorrow, you'll follow the math, the geometry, the impossible ratios and alignments, because if the date is wrong and the function is unknown, then the design might be the only truth left. And design doesn't lie. You spend the morning staring at numbers, ratios, angles, equations scribbled into sand, carved into tablets, and whispered like spells by people who speak in degrees instead of words. It's a different kind of language, the language of design. And today you're going to see just how deep that rabbit hole goes. Because the deeper you look into the Great Pyramids' architecture, the more it stops feeling like a building and starts feeling like a message. You begin at the base. The foundation of the Great Pyramid covers roughly 13 acres. That's already absurd. But what's more absurd is how precise it is. Each side measures almost exactly 230.4 meters, give or take a couple centimeters. 4 sides. 4 nearly perfect right angles. Massive stone blocks laid out so precisely that modern engineers have admitted they'd struggle to replicate the alignment today without satellite-guided equipment. But it gets weirder. The pyramid isn't just aligned with itself, it's aligned with the Earth. Here's your historical fact. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. That's not magnetic north, which shifts. That's true celestial north, the Earth's actual rotational axis. Somehow, 4,500 years ago, or maybe longer, someone oriented nearly 6 million tons of stone to line up with the planet's cardinal points more accurately than most modern buildings. That level of precision is hard to dismiss. You can't eyeball your way into that kind of alignment with copper tools and string, unless they knew something we don't. A few steps further, and you're tracing the slope of the pyramid's sides, an angle of 51.84 degrees. Nothing random about that either. When you calculate the slope in relation to the height and base, you discover something astonishing. It encodes the mathematical constant pi. P. Yes, that P. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. How? Take half the base of the pyramid and multiply it by P. You get the pyramid's height, close to perfect. That means the pyramid is not just a triangle sitting on a square, it's a square that reaches for a circle, a geometric bridge, a 3-dimensional equation in stone. And it doesn't stop there. You're led into a shaded tent where a small team of researchers, some from universities, others from, let's call it, outside the system, are laying out diagrams. The pyramid, they argue, isn't just built on Earth, it knows Earth. The numbers in its structure map out the planet itself. Here's your quirky fringe fact. When you multiply the pyramid's height by 43,200, a number derived from astronomical precession cycles, you get the polar radius of Earth. Multiply the base perimeter by that same number, and you get Earth's equatorial circumference. No, really. Go ahead and check. Coincidence? That's a lot of coincidence. The number 43,200 isn't arbitrary. It's directly tied to the Great Year. the roughly 26,000-year cycle of Earth's axial wobble, known as precession. Ancient cultures all over the world obsessed over this cycle. The Mayans, the Sumerians, the Vedic scholars, the Egyptians called it the Great Return, and here it is, embedded in the dimensions of the pyramid. Someone was counting, not in years, but in epochs. Here's the scholarly debate. Are the pyramid's proportions intentional expressions of mathematical constants, or the result of later reinterpretations? Mainstream scholars argue that the appearance of pi and the golden ratio, pi, in the pyramid's measurements may be the result of chance or modern projection, that the builders didn't understand those numbers as we do, that we're reverse engineering symbolism onto a structure that was never meant to hold it. Others argue that these proportions are too consistent, too elegant, and too fundamental to be accidental. You sit with the numbers for a while. They don't lie. They don't bend to myth or interpretation. They just are. That's the thing about geometry. It doesn't care what you believe. It either works or it doesn't. And here, in the body of the Great Pyramid, the geometry works perfectly. The whole structure, viewed from above, is laid out like a circuit. From the base to the tip, the ratios mirror fractals found in nature, in spirals, waves, seeds. You start to see the pyramid not as a structure, but as a harmonic, a frozen frequency, a snapshot of vibration rendered in limestone and granite. One of the researchers points out that the king's chamber is a perfect double cube, a shape said to amplify resonance in acoustics. You remember lying in that granite box, feeling your heartbeat echo like a drum in your skull? You remember the gallery steps, tuned like ribs on a flute. The entire pyramid suddenly feels less like a tomb and more like a device. A device for what? You don't know yet. But if you're right, then someone designed this thing to communicate with something bigger than themselves. Not a god, not a king, maybe not even humans. The sun is starting to drop as you make one final loop around the base. You stop at the northwest corner. It's off by just a hair, less than an inch out of true square. Not bad for 6 million tons of rock, not bad for someone working in 2500 BCE, or 10,000 BCE, or whenever this thing was actually built. And now, a thought you've been avoiding all day creeps in. If the pyramid encodes knowledge of the Earth, its size, its shape, its precessional cycles, then whoever built it had access to information it supposedly took us thousands of years to rediscover. That kind of precision doesn't come from trial and error. It comes from inheritance. Maybe they didn't figure it out. Maybe they were taught. That night, you stare up at the stars from the top of a nearby dune. Orion rises again, perfectly aligned with the belt stars that mirror the three pyramids. You realize that this whole plateau is a kind of map. Geometry above, geometry below. Tomorrow you'll dig into that alignment, because the stars are whispering too, and someone a long time ago listened. It's strange how, after everything, the echoing chambers, the subterranean pit, the math that feels more like magic than architecture, you still find yourself staring up at the stars like an ancient farmer hoping for a sign. But the ancients weren't guessing. They weren't hoping. They were tracking. And what they tracked with unnerving precision were the stars. So today, you follow their gaze, not into books, not into tombs, into the sky. You start with the three pyramids, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, rising from the Giza plateau like some celestial punctuation mark on the skin of the earth. Everyone agrees they're impressive. Everyone agrees they were placed with intention. But the real debate is what that intention was. You pull out a map, not of Egypt, of the stars. Specifically, Orion's belt. 3 stars, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. Together they form the belt of the constellation Orion, the celestial hunter. And when you place a transparent overlay of those stars on the Giza pyramid layout, scaled and rotated just so, the match is eerie. The alignment isn't perfect, but it's close enough to make your spine tighten. Even the offset of the smallest pyramid, Menkaure, mirrors the slight stagger in the belt stars. Coincidence? That's what people used to say, not so much anymore. Here's your historical fact. In 1994, researcher Robert Bauval proposed what's now known as the Orion correlation theory. His argument? The pyramids of Giza were intentionally laid out to reflect Orion's belt, as it would have appeared in the sky around 10,500 BCE. Why that year? Because due to axial precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotation, the belt stars aligned with the pyramid's orientation at that time in a way they no longer do, which means either it's just a weird coincidence, or the builders of the pyramids knew about precession. That's not small stuff. It took us until the 20th century to accurately model the long-term wobble of the Earth's axis. If ancient Egyptians, or whoever preceded them, were aware of it thousands of years ago, it changes everything we know about the origins of astronomy, architecture, and frankly, civilization. So you ask around. You visit a temple where an old stargazer, he refuses to be called an astrologer or astronomer, spends his nights charting stars with tools that look older than writing. He nods when you mention Orion. He says, "The sky tells you when, the earth tells you where, the gods tell you why." Poetic, not helpful. But then he points toward the eastern horizon and says, "It's not just the belt, it's what the belt is pointing to." You follow his gaze, and there it is, the Sphinx. Crouched on the eastern edge of the plateau, the Sphinx faces directly east, toward the rising sun at the spring equinox. That alone feels symbolic. But here's where it gets weird. Around 10,500 BCE, the same date proposed by the Orion alignment, the constellation rising on the spring equinox wasn't Aries, it wasn't Pisces, it was Leo, a lion. So let's recap. 3 pyramids match Orion's belt circa 10,500 BCE. The Sphinx, shaped like a lion, faces directly east toward the rising sun, exactly where Leo would appear at that same time. Not bad for a bunch of ancient stonemasons with no known star charts. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some researchers believe the Sphinx may have originally been carved as a full lion, long before the current pharaonic face was added. The body shows heavy weathering, possibly from rainfall, which, as we've already covered, hasn't happened here in thousands of years. That would mean the Sphinx predates the pyramids, maybe by a lot. The entire Giza complex, seen from above, starts to look less like a cemetery and more like a star map frozen in stone. But why? You walk along the western edge of the plateau with a man who insists he's not a scholar, but can recite the Book of the Dead from memory. He says the stars aren't just decoration, they're destinations. That the pharaoh's soul was believed to ascend to Orion, where the god Osiris ruled. That the pyramid was a launch pad, not a tomb. A structure built to align the spirit with the cosmos at the exact right time, in the exact right way. You're reminded of the star shafts in the king's chamber, angled perfectly toward Orion and Polaris. Not air vents, not mistakes. Celestial corridors. Here's the scholarly debate. Were the Giza pyramids designed with precise astronomical alignments in mind? And if so, to what end? Mainstream archaeology acknowledges that the pyramids are astronomically aligned, particularly to true north, but stops short of endorsing theories about star maps and ancient precession knowledge. Critics argue that ancient people could observe patterns without understanding the underlying math. But proponents of the Orion correlation theory claim the level of precision and the consistent mythological connection to the stars suggests a deeper knowledge, one passed down or preserved from an even earlier culture. That night, you lie on the sand again, staring up at the belt of Orion. The stars shimmer like cold fire, and for a moment, you see it. The pyramid below, the stars above, the silent connection stretching across time. And suddenly, the pyramid stops feeling like a mystery. It feels like a clock. One designed to tick not in seconds, but in millennia. Maybe it's a marker, a message, a monument to a moment when earth and sky were aligned, when something began, or ended, or was waiting to return. Tomorrow, you're going back inside, back to the Queen's chamber, because if the King's chamber was about the end, maybe the Queen's was about the beginning, and something tells you it's not empty. You're back inside the Queen's chamber now, standing in that strangely quiet space nestled deep within the pyramid, halfway up the slope between the subterranean chamber and the King's. You've been here before, but not like this. Last time you walked in thinking it was a tomb without a body, a kind of architectural shrug halfway up the Great Pyramid's interior. Today, you're walking in with the sense that something's been watching you this whole time, waiting. You lower yourself to the floor, press your palm against the cool limestone, and just listen. Not with your ears, with your skin. The Queen's chamber has a different silence than the others. The King's chamber hums like an amplifier. The subterranean chamber presses against your ribs with the weight of the earth itself. But here, in the Queen's chamber, the air feels expectant, like it's holding its breath. Let's talk about the weird stuff. First off, this chamber isn't finished the way you'd expect. The walls are smooth, but not polished. The floor is uneven in places. There's a low pointed corbel ceiling that slopes inward at the top. Not flat, not vaulted, something in between. There's a shallow niche carved into the eastern wall, as if something once stood there. But now it's just an empty recess. No sarcophagus, no decoration, no inscriptions, no body. Just a feeling that you're standing in a room that was meant to do something, not hold something. And then there are the shafts. Here's your historical fact. Like the King's chamber, the Queen's chamber has two narrow shafts extending from its walls, one to the north, one to the south. For a long time, no one knew they were there. Unlike the King's chamber shafts, these don't open to the outside, they're sealed at both ends. Discovered in 1872 by explorer Wayneman Dixon, they remained an architectural enigma for more than a century. Then, in 1993, a robotic camera named Upwart 2 was sent crawling through one of them. What it found was weird. A tiny stone door, deep inside the southern shaft with two copper handles protruding from it, like a miniature portal to nowhere. A sealed mystery, inside a sealed mystery, inside the Queen's chamber of the Great Pyramid. It was later dubbed Ganton Brink's Door, after the engineer who sent in the robot. Everyone expected treasure behind it. What they found? Another door. In 2002, another robot, this one with a fibre optic camera, breached the first door and looked beyond. It found a small space, then a second limestone slab. No gold, no inscriptions, just layers, seals, hidden voids. It's like the pyramid is layering its secrets, burying them under a system of recursive doors that only make sense if you stop thinking like a person and start thinking like a machine. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some researchers believe these shafts were not for air, not symbolic, and not decorative. They believe the copper handles on the first door suggest it was an electrical component, that the Queen's chamber may have been a reaction chamber. Yes, reaction chamber. That materials, possibly acids and alkalis, were mixed here, generating chemical energy. Combined with the granite's piezoelectric properties above, it could have been part of a literal power plant, not metaphorical energy, actual energy. That this chamber, right here, wasn't a tomb, it was a battery. You scoff, then you stop scoffing. Because you remember the layout of the pyramid as a whole. Water flowing beneath, resonance building in the gallery, frequency pulsing in the King's chamber, and here, perhaps, a reaction centre. You stare at the niche in the wall again. It's about shoulder height, empty. But a few scholars have suggested that it once held a device, a vessel, a container, maybe even a kind of core component, used in a chemical or energetic process. The pyramid, in this view, is less of a monument and more of a machine. And if that's true, this chamber wasn't designed to memorialize the dead. It was designed to transform the living. Here's the scholarly debate. What is the purpose of the Queen's chamber and its mysterious shafts? Traditional Egyptology has largely considered it an unused or symbolic burial space, with the shafts seen as spiritual channels or architectural experiments. But some Egyptologists now acknowledge that their alignment, while less dramatic than those of the King's chamber, may still point to celestial bodies. Fringe theorists go further, arguing for energetic, chemical, or even electromagnetic purposes. But without full access, without breaching the final door, no one can say for sure. You lie down on the floor of the Queen's chamber and stare up at the sloped ceiling. Something about this room sticks in your chest like a forgotten name. It doesn't feel like a mistake, or a backup chamber, or an abandoned plan. It feels like a core. The pyramid, for all its grandeur, keeps circling around certain themes: alignment, vibration, secrecy, and transformation. What if this chamber is where those forces converged? What if this was the control room, or the heart? The place where the frequencies were focused, the chemistry completed, the activation began. You realise slowly that it's not just the structure that has layers, it's you, your thoughts, your assumptions, your beliefs. They've been slowly rearranged step by step, shaft by shaft. And this chamber, quiet and dim and almost forgotten, feels like the mental fulcrum where everything turns. You sit up, breathe, listen again. The Queen's chamber says nothing, but it feels like it's listening. That night you return to the camp quieter than usual. You skip the fire, skip dinner, just lie in the dark beneath the moon, listening to the distant wind as it rolls over the desert, like the whisper of an ancient engine cooling down after being idle for millennia. Tomorrow you'll explore what the ancients actually said about the pyramid. The myths, the warnings, the metaphors passed down for generations. Because if the machine has a purpose, the old stories might still remember, and memory, like stone, doesn't always fade. By now, the pyramid is more than just a structure to you. It's a character, a presence, something that watches and waits and maybe, just maybe, remembers. You've traced its lines, crawled through its veins, stood inside its heart, and stared up at its mirrored image in the sky. But what about the stories? The things passed down by people who lived in its shadow long before carbon dating and robots with cameras were even a concept. What did the ancients say about it? Because here's the thing. If you want to understand a monument, you can't just measure its blocks. You have to measure its meaning. So today, you sit in a tent that smells like old parchment and dry figs, surrounded by rolled scrolls, tattered books, and storytellers who were quoting Plato before you knew his name. Your guide is a scholar of oral tradition, a man who believes that truth isn't always written in stone, but whispered through generations like smoke through fingers. You ask him what the oldest story is about the pyramid. He doesn't hesitate. They say it was built before the flood. You blink. Which flood? He smiles. All of them. Here's your historical fact. There are ancient texts, Arabic, Greek, even some passed through early Christian traditions, that describe the Great Pyramid as having been built by a civilization that knew a great catastrophe was coming. In particular, Arab historians like al-Makrizi and Ibrahim ibn Wasif Shah wrote that the pyramids were constructed by a pre-Diluvian king, Saurid, sometimes equated with Enoch or Hermes Trismegistus, who foresaw the destruction of humanity and built the pyramids to preserve knowledge. Knowledge of the heavens, the earth, and the cycles of time. Not gold, not grain, not mummies, information. According to these sources, the pyramid wasn't just a monument. It was a library, a vault, a message left in stone, impervious to fire, water, and forgetfulness. And its builders weren't tomb architects, they were archivists, engineers of memory. The scholar rolls out a worn page and traces a finger along the faded script. It says here that two kinds of destruction were foretold, fire from the sky and water from the earth. So they built two pyramids, one of stone to resist the flood, and one of brick to resist fire. You ask where the second one is. He shrugs. Gone, or buried. Or maybe we haven't even recognised it yet. Here's your quirky fringe fact. The inventory stealer, a controversial artefact found near the Sphinx, claims that Pharaoh Khufu repaired the pyramid, rather than building it. That the Sphinx and temple complex already existed in his time. Most scholars dismiss it as a later forgery, created to enhance the status of the local priesthood. But if even a fraction of it is true, it flips the entire narrative on its head. Khufu wasn't the builder, he was the inheritor. You flip through more of the texts, Plato's Timaeus, the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, Babylonian star maps. Over and over, one theme keeps surfacing like a forgotten island, knowledge lost, and knowledge preserved. The ancients seemed obsessed with preserving sacred geometry, celestial mechanics, and the cycles of destruction and rebirth. And somehow, all of it keeps pointing back to the pyramids. Here's the scholarly debate. Are the myths surrounding the Great Pyramid simply metaphors and folklore? Or do they contain veiled references to real historical knowledge passed down from lost civilizations? Traditional historians view these stories as symbolic at best and superstitious at worst. Myths of the flood, pre-Diluvian kings and secret chambers are often seen as post-facto narratives layered onto existing monuments. But some researchers argue that oral traditions often preserve kernels of truth, especially in cultures where formal writing came late. After all, how much history are we passing down as story? You leave the tent with your head spinning. Not from numbers this time, but from narrative. The idea that the pyramid may be more than an architectural achievement, that it could be a kind of time capsule, one designed not just to survive the elements, but to whisper across generations. And then your guide asks quietly, "Have you heard about the Hall of Records?" You stop walking. It's one of those terms that gets thrown around in conspiracy circles, usually somewhere between aliens and ancient Atlanteans. But your guide doesn't say it like that. He says it like someone remembering a place he's never seen but knows exists. He points to the Sphinx. They say the entrance is beneath the paw, that there's a chamber down there, unopened, filled with tablets, scrolls, star maps, and knowledge from before history began. You've heard this one before. In the 20th century, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed that a hall of records lay beneath the Giza Plateau, hidden until the time was right. Mainstream archaeology, of course, denies its existence. Ground-penetrating radar around the Sphinx has revealed some anomalies, strange voids, but nothing's ever been excavated. Too controversial, too disruptive, too much to lose. But something about today, the stories, the symbols, the way the pyramid seems to echo with intent, makes you pause. Because what if those stories aren't just decoration? What if they're the key? You spend the evening sitting on the low wall near the workers' village, staring out at the pyramid as the last of the sun bleeds into the horizon. You think about the myths, the flood, the fire, the idea that a group of people, long forgotten, decided to carve a message into 6 million tons of stone so it could survive everything else humanity would eventually forget. You think about what kind of world would need to do that, and then you think about your world. Maybe the pyramid isn't about what's buried in it. Maybe it's about what's buried in us. Tomorrow you'll go higher, to the place where all the lines converge, the tip, or what's left, of it. Because there's still one piece missing, and it might be the most important one of all. The summit of the Great Pyramid is not a place most people ever see, not up close, not in real time. That's because technically you're not supposed to be up here. But today somehow you are. One more whisper, one more favour, one more dusty handshake behind a half-torn tent flap, and you're standing at the very top of 6 million tons of history, looking out across the Giza Plateau like a ghost floating above the past. Only the pyramid doesn't have a true peak anymore. That's the first thing you notice. The tip, the literal point of the pyramid, the part you'd expect to see in every cartoon, every souvenir statue, every kid's drawing, is gone, lopped off, blunt. The last 10 metres or so have been missing for centuries, leaving a flat platform just large enough to stand on, legs shaking, hands gripping the breeze like you're expecting it to knock you over. And maybe it could, because up here the pyramid doesn't feel like stone anymore. It feels like scale, like you're standing on the back of something too big to ever really understand. You kneel and run your hand over the weathered limestone, bleached and pitted by thousands of years of sun and sand. The original capstone, or pyramidion, is long gone. Some say it was made of electrum, a mixture of gold and silver that would have blazed like a second sun. Others say it was solid limestone carved with symbols long since lost. A few even whisper that it was something stranger, metallic, geometric, perhaps even crystalline. Not Egyptian, not earthly. Here's your historical fact. No one has ever found the original capstone of the Great Pyramid. No fragments, no inscriptions, no confirmation that it was ever installed at all. What we do know is that the current peak has been flat since at least the 15th century, possibly longer. Theories abound, but there's no agreed-upon answer as to what once crowned the most precise monument on Earth. You look down. The world spreads out in all directions. Cairo to the east, the desert to the west, the Nile winding like a ribbon of memory, and right below you, the entire structure lies perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions, humming with purpose. And you can't stop wondering, what was the capstone for? Because the pyramid isn't just a triangle, it's a pyramid for a reason. That shape, that upward convergence is more than just an aesthetic decision. It focuses energy, it aligns, it channels, and the capstone is where all that convergence ends. Or maybe, where it begins. You remember everything you've learned so far. The subterranean chamber humming with Earth's vibrations, the Queen's chamber, sealed and mysterious, laced with chemical speculation, the grand gallery, a resonant hallway shaped like a frequency tunnel, the King's chamber, granite-lined and buzzing with tones you can feel in your ribs, and now, You're standing where it all would have come together. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some researchers believe the Great Pyramid, complete with its original capstone, functioned as a kind of energy transmitter, that the pyramid wasn't just symbolic, it was active. One theory, often dismissed as pseudoscience but too specific to ignore, proposes that when the pyramid was complete, capstone in place, limestone casing intact, subterranean water flowing beneath, the structure could generate a form of microwave or scalar energy, not for lights, not for cities, but maybe for communication, or healing, or something else. You shake your head. Sounds crazy, right? But then again, so did the alignment with Orion. So did the advanced geometry. So did the dating discrepancies and the voids and the shafts and the lost symbols. And the pyramid is still here. Still perfect. Still unanswered. Here's the scholarly debate. Was the missing capstone symbolic, ceremonial, or functional? Most Egyptologists assume it was a gilded stone, a simple final piece to complete the pyramidion. Others argue that the capstone itself may have held inscriptions or religious significance lost to time, but the more fringe voices insist it was something more. Something missing not just physically, but conceptually. The final key to understanding the pyramid's full purpose. You crouch, then lie flat on the warm limestone, eyes closed. Not meditating, just feeling. And you feel it. Something subtle, a pressure, a hum. Not sound, not exactly, but a kind of low-grade awareness that pulses beneath your bones like the memory of a frequency. The air up here is thinner, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels expectant, as if the structure beneath you is still waiting for something, still incomplete, still listening. You sit up, staring at the flat peak before you, the place where all geometry once ended, all alignment, all math, all story. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the capstone wasn't just a block of stone or metal. Maybe it was a concept, the unification of earth and sky, of matter and frequency, of human intention and cosmic design. Maybe that's why it's missing, because it's us. You climb down slowly, stone by stone, with the sun melting into the sand behind you like a final breath. The pyramid looms above you once more, but now it feels like it's been activated. Not in the flashy science fiction sense, not with lights and hums and lasers, but in you. It has rewired how you see everything. History, time, purpose, the stars. You came here looking for an answer to how it was built, but you're leaving with a better question. Why? And tomorrow, you rest, because the journey is over. But just before you fall asleep, you'll feel the pyramid again, this time not beneath your feet, but inside your chest. A shape, a rhythm, a resonance, waiting for something lost to return. So here you are, lying in your tent one last time. The hum of the desert is your lullaby. Soft wind pushing dust across canvas, the occasional distant shuffle of feet, and the persistent low echo of the pyramid you somehow still feel, even without touching it. You stare up at the dark fabric above you, but you're not really seeing anything. Not the ceiling, not the tent, not even the stars. You're replaying the whole journey in your head like a dream you haven't fully woken up from. You think about the first time you walked into the passage, how it narrowed the deeper you went, how it seemed to squeeze the modern world right out of your lungs. You remember crouching in the subterranean chamber, the hollow underworld of the pyramid, where stone meets silence in the most uncomfortable way. You remember your first strange resonance in the Grand Gallery, like the pyramid had its own tuning fork buried in the walls, and that granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber, how it wasn't empty so much as it was listening. You remember the stories too, the scholars with their maps and ratios, the fringe theorist with their whispers of energy and procession and forgotten knowledge. You remember how absurd it all seemed, until it didn't. Until every strange design choice felt less like confusion and more like intention. Until even the myths, long dismissed as nonsense, started to feel like metaphors so old they'd fossilized into truth. You thought you were coming here to solve a mystery. You didn't realize you were part of it, because maybe the Great Pyramid was never meant to be solved. Maybe it's not a riddle with an answer. Maybe it's a mirror that shows us how small we are, and how much potential we've forgotten. You think of the missing capstone again, the final piece, lost or never placed, and you can't shake the feeling that maybe it was left incomplete for a reason. Not as an accident, not as a failure, but as a challenge, a cosmic dare, a silent whisper that says, you finish it, you figure it out. And when you do, maybe something changes, not for the pyramid, for us. So now, as your breathing slows and your body begins to sink into the warmth of the blankets, you let go of the need for an answer. You let the questions swirl. You let the hum settle. The pyramid stands out there in the dark, same as it has for thousands of years, weathered but unbroken, mysterious but still here. And that's the real miracle, isn't it? Not what it is, but that it endures. Good night, traveller. Sleep soft. May your dreams be full of stars, echoes and questions too old to answer.